Okay, it's 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started with our Planning Commission meeting tonight. Welcome, everyone, for attending. We've got a few things on the agenda tonight that we'll be reviewing. To get started with, I'm going to ask Commissioner Mendenhall to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would the audience please rise and repeat the pledge after me?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay, on the agenda there was actually a work session that we didn't actually have. There wasn't a formal agenda for that, so that was not actually done. The second item is the minutes. We're going to table that. Everybody's got the minutes in front of them, but they kind of come to us late, so review them. We'll be ready for the next meeting and take action on the minutes at our next meeting. The next item is going to be a general plan and zone change. This is a public hearing, and we'll let Dave walk us through that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Two separate proposals here. We'll talk about them together because they involve several of the same properties. First of all, the proposed general plan amendment. Talk about that really quick. Right now, on the north side of US Highway 6 at the intersection of Spanish Fork Parkway, 2550 East is the coordinate for that road. Again, on the north side of that road, let's maybe talk about this first. This is the current general plan. And to maybe remind everybody about what our general plan is, this is the city's long-range vision for land uses. And when we're talking about the general plan, typically, rather than to focus on exactly what's going to happen on an individual piece of a property and that type of a thing, we're looking at things a little bit more broadly to where, again, instead of focusing on maybe a real specific site, we're talking about a little bit bigger area, and really the types of land use relationships that we think are appropriate and make sense. So for example, at an intersection like this one here, which is significant, US Highway 6, a very, very substantial transportation corridor, Spanish Fork Parkway, which someday we think will almost be kind of like a belt route for the east part of Spanish Fork, maybe even the eastern part of our end of Utah County. An intersection, currently a lighted intersection at Highway 6, a place where there's probably some appetite. Certainly have seen it on the other side of the highway there on the south side for some kind of non-residential development. And typically with that, we try to promote that concept where maybe you could see some retail development, commercial uses, and that type of a thing. And when we see those types of characteristics, we generally try to reflect those things on this document here, on the general plan. And right now, it's designated as such so that on different parts of that intersection, you could have some non-residential development, or maybe you could have some residential development that's a little bit higher density than we might otherwise have in that part of the community, simply with the idea that as you have better access to a big transportation corridor, that's a great place to take traffic, again, from a little bit higher density kind of residential project. The mixed use designation would allow for a lot of different things to happen with the idea that, again, around a site like that, there probably are several different land uses that would work well, that in different ways would complement surrounding land uses and be good additions to the community. You can see from this image here, again, this is the current general plan, that we do have something that's a little bit of an anomaly in the area with that public facilities designation that we have there. Designated public facilities for a few different reasons. We'll talk first of all about the existing land use. Right now, the majority of this parcel here, or these parcels, the majority of the area is vacant land but that is Spanish Fork City, does have a power substation on the site. That's one of the things that property was purchased by the city for some 10 or 12 years ago. We also purchased that property with the intent, really with the plan, that we would build a fire station on part of that site. And Mr. Jacobson, Tyler Jacobson, is here with us tonight. He represents the city administration office, and he can go probably into more detail on some of this than I can. But those of you that have kind of stayed tuned into some things that have happened recently, you know that we've broke ground on a fire station just south of this site, on the other side of US 6, right on the north side of Canyon Road. It was decided that it was better to have that facility sited south of US 6 than on the north side of US 6 and on the north side of the railroad tracks. So when that decision was made, essentially the city was in a position to surplus that land. So that's why tonight we are proposing that the general plan be amended so that public facilities designation be changed to mixed use, because the city has indeed initiated the process to market that land with the intention of selling it for some private use. So that's the first part, or the first proposal that I'll talk about relative to that area around this intersection, that mixed use change for the city-owned property over here. Maybe while I'm at it, I would like to get your thoughts on one other thing. Some of you that have been on the commission for a while, I think you remember that there was a proposal made a few years ago to do something similar to this, to expand that mixed-use designation in this area around the intersection, and that really drew a lot of interest from the neighborhood to the north. Certainly drew some concerns, or raised some concerns by residents that live just a little ways away on the west side of 2550 East. And understanding their feelings, expecting that they may not have changed in the last couple of years, we really aren't interested in doing anything to cause them any additional alarm relative to changing the general plan. Now, that being said, frankly, if you could have a non-residential use here and here, it does seem to me like this particular corner here potentially is a good candidate as well. And I wonder if you have thoughts, advice, a recommendation relative to how maybe just the imagery that we have here could be modified to make that a little bit more clear, just that potentially the door would be open to you considering a zone change for this corner based on how we represent that particular space with maybe representing that mixed use designation extending there onto that parcel more clearly than we have here. So I throw that out just as food for thought and maybe something we can talk about. I'm going to go ahead and, sorry. Let me throw the zone change out there really quickly as well. Just, I'll let you decide how we proceed from there. So the next slide, if we can take a peek at that really quickly. Again, current over here, the area surrounding the intersection right now, again on the north side, in addition to having a public facilities designation on our general plan, we have a public facilities zone. So the city-owned property over here is zoned public facilities. So we're proposing to change that to commercial 2. And also, you'll see that on the other side of 2550 East, where the property is already designated mixed use, we do have a proposal from a group that would like to construct a convenience store there. They've initiated the site plan approval process. They've also applied for a zone change, and in part, these items fall on your agenda together tonight. It's really happenstance. I think actually it's a really positive coincidence that the timing is what it is, so we can kind of talk about it all at once.
Do they own that property yet, or is it under?
I don't believe they have purchased it yet, so I think it's just under contract. But I think maybe the proposal speaks for itself then, right? We want to sell the property for non-residential uses, ideally a use that would have a retail component. If indeed that's feasible, these folks here need the commercial 2 zoning to be able to have that site plan for a convenience store approved. And because we believe this proposal ultimately, it really is consistent with the intent of the general plan, which is to have non-residential uses around that intersection. And otherwise, just to speak for myself, I think that land use arrangement is entirely appropriate. This is exactly the type of zoning arrangement that we want to see, in my view, around this type of an intersection. Staff doesn't have any concerns with recommending that this be approved. So that's where we're at, kind of with a little bit of history, and just a description of what the proposals are. Again, 2 distinct proposals, so if you're inclined to take action on them tonight, we'd ask that you make separate motions. And if there's anything that you'd like to talk about having modified or adjusted or anything like that, it's a great time to do that.
Good presentation, Dave. Thank you. I got a question on the one that's currently right here. So that is zoned RR right now, but on the general plan, it's showing mixed use, at least in a piece of that. Is that right?
Yes.
But the RR does come all the way to the Highway 6 right now,
does.
zoning-wise.
Yes. So the only properties in the area, in fact, that have different zoning, really it is just that subdivision to the north. Just following our typical practice, we wouldn't change the zoning on a property to anything from rural residential until we actually have a development that's ready to go. We wouldn't pre-zone property for development, so to speak, and that's the situation that we're in there.
So your question to us about our thoughts on maybe extending that further to the north. This is the proposed zone change here for that RR. That's the borders of that that we're talking about. And are you asking if we would have an appetite to go any further to the north?
Not with the zone change, so
Okay.
maybe if you can go back one slide, we could talk about the general plan.
So not with the zone change, but maybe just the mixed use.
Right, so if, for example, maybe somebody came in next week, next year, in 5 years with the desire to locate an office building or, some kind of a retail development, strip center, something like that on that corner, I would make the case that it's a very appropriate location for that type of a thing. And having access to some of the additional services that that type of a project could provide in that part of the community, I think certainly could be a good thing. I'm particularly comfortable recommending that we try to make that desire, I would even say, or that potential more clear because of the flexibility that we have with that mixed-use zone. And in all honesty, at the same time, if somebody came in and simply wanted to develop 15,000 square foot lots, which is really what that estate density residential designation is intended to accommodate all the way to the corner, I probably would feel very comfortable with that as well. But at least having the door open for somebody if they did want to propose something other than just a simple residential subdivision, I think that's worth talking about.
If we went further with that suggestion yours, went further to the north with the mixed use, would that stop anyone from doing what you just mentioned and still bringing the RR into that mixed use?
I would argue that it wouldn't personally.
Okay.
That'd be my perspective.
So it just gives it that flexibility to really do either.
Yeah, and that's the intent of our general plan, given the way that we've tried to illustrate things, is to suggest that that flexibility is inherent.
It would still require a zone change later.
It still require a zone change, so there would be public hearings and different things like that. I think it would get harder to make a case that that's appropriate relative to kind of the land use relationships that might make sense here.
Right.
If we just keep it exactly like it is now. And that's why I think there's maybe some value in talking about sliding it a little bit further to the north.
Any of the commissioners have any comments on that?
So what's that zone right now, that other piece right now? Or
Which side?
on our general plan? Yeah, what's that?
in our general
State.
plan.
It's
All right.
designated for 15,000 square foot lots right now.
So have you talked to the landowners that we thought might be talking about something like this with them?
I could say representatives of the landowners, yes. Yeah, the same folks that were involved in the general plan amendment proposal a few years ago. We've talked with them.
Okay.
And that piece that is right there is quite a large piece, and it goes nearly to that intersection, if I'm not
The
mistaken.
piece
Is that right?
does, and frankly, I think the ownership goes well beyond that.
Yes,
with
the
folks
ownership
that-
goes east as well.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is that when these folks that have homes here now were involved in the discussion the last time, they were pretty adamant that they didn't want any kind of commercial development in here. Has anything changed their attitude towards that? And if so, you know, how far would they, you know, if you've got mixed use here already, and that's what we're proposing here, then how far north would you, I guess what I'm saying is we'd probably have to go the entire, at least pick up that piece of ground in that designation, is that right? All the way?
I would not suggest that we do that we go quite that far in trying to illustrate
think-
what.
That would a lot of discussion.
Into a question that you raised, and I don't have an answer for it, just in terms of what is the disposition of the neighborhood here, I don't have any reason to think that their feelings have changed, right? And for that reason, I think it makes good sense to be sensitive to their concerns. So I would not necessarily feel comfortable extending that designation up any further, which was really the proposal that we reviewed and that you considered a couple of years ago. But at the same time, some part of that potentially we could have another light here or some kind of traffic control that could really make that an enticing or attractive site for, again, some kind of non-residential use. And I think having that be part of the community's vision, which is really what this document is, makes some sense. That all being said, if it remains like it is here, or even just exactly like it is here, somebody could always come back in the future and propose a general plan amendment. So we don't necessarily need to do it now, but it might be a convenient time if it's something that you're comfortable with.
So wouldn't that be wise if we just left it alone and just deal with what we're talking about tonight and move on? And then if somebody does come in the future and ask for that, then we deal with it then.
Honestly, that's not my recommendation, but it's for you to decide.
That's my thought as well, Richard. Just if it's in the general plan as is, there's a reason for it, and I'd say leave it that way until there's a reason to change it. That's my opinion.
I also think that if we were going to do that on that piece, that, you know, those residents should, you know, this is a public hearing, and if they were here, you know, we would hear from them as well. And so I wouldn't be comfortable with making that proposal tonight.
We're not making a proposal on it, though. You're just kind of gauging our temperature on for a future change. Or we add that in.
We
Change
could
that to
certainly,
50
that's an option. So yeah, just in the way I think I said it initially, food for thought. If it's something that you see value in considering at this point in time, it wouldn't take much effort to maybe just adjust, again, the kind of imagery that we have here. I think certainly given the way that this proposal's been noticed, that could be within your purview. You could consider that or not.
So the one thought I have is if we were to consider this in the future, I would do more than a few acres to accommodate some convenience retail kind of application there. Because what you're saying, Dave, is this use could be high-density housing, right? Couldn't it be apartments or?
Be consistent with, the mixed-use concept.
That concept, and my concern would be if we really wanted to keep this area up here, this estate kind of density, and now you're gonna have possibly high density right next door to estate density, and I just wonder if that could be a challenge. Now, I think C-stores, some retail places, some restaurants, I can see that being a need here, but I wouldn't make it so big that it makes sense for a 300-door apartment complex, if we're trying to keep that a state area.
Yeah, and, again, I think there's some beauty in having a general plan that is less specific than some that we've had in the past. Something that allows for somebody to make a proposal and you guys to consider it, maybe within some broad parameters. Now, that being said, I think what I'm talking about now is that, hey, does it make sense to suggest that maybe a couple of acres of that could be used, right? Versus maybe the 20 that it would take to get to 300
That's what
units or something like that, so just,
A couple acres would make some sense to give conveniences to the neighborhood.
So is the purpose or the reasoning is just to try and level this off? So it's not, you've got a bunch of homes, and I'm trying to understand the reasoning why you'd want to just adjust that at all.
maybe to say it, just to even forget about this imagery. If you have, for example, a convenience store here and here, so you have two corners of an intersection with something like that, what's appropriate to put on another corner? Same intersection, let's say it's a lighted intersection, or that type of thing. And I think there are a lot of different things that could make sense. I think 15,000 square foot lots, you could easily do that, and it's not gonna be a big deal. But also, I think if somebody came in and they wanted to do something other than 15,000 square foot lots, that might be worth considering.
Do you feel like that road is gonna be the intersection? That road wouldn't change as the developments came in?
Particularly with the way that this site is designed, I don't think it's gonna change. We have talked in the past about the idea of maybe that being realigned. But I think if this property develops the way that it's proposed, that's probably set in stone. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
I think either way, and I appreciate as well the idea that that's certainly something that could be revisited down the road.
That seems to be the detriment so far, especially with what we faced with the neighbors to the north. I can appreciate where you're going with this, Dave, though, because things change as the town grows, and that's the need to improve this now. It's going to be such a vital intersection. It's got a traffic light on. I think what's happened here across the street with the Walmart Express and the gas station has been a good thing for that area, personally. I mean, there was a lot of resistance on that from the neighbors, and yet you go in the parking lot and it's getting utilized a lot. This little strip mall here that's getting developed right now is going to have 8 or 9 businesses in there that could be anywhere from a real estate office to a lube center to a title company. I think them would be all good neighbors if that's something that could end up in here. So I tend to agree with your vision on that too as well, but I don't know that the commissioners are prepared to go and make a proposal to go any further north, even if it was.
I just have a hard time thinking that we need to talk to landowners first about it. I know we've talked to them before, but we need to talk to them now because their vision of their property might be a little different than what we're talking about right now. And we have people right now that want what's up there right now here today, and we'll listen to them and go with their proposal. If this landowner decides to move on and carry it on, then he needs to be heard, and the neighbors need to hear that too, and that's how I feel. So I don't think the landowner has heard this proposal yet, and I just think we need to wait on that and honor what he might be feeling.
I'm sensing that from probably the three of you.
For me, it's more of just wait until there's a reason to change it. I don't feel the need to really, for a general plan amendment or anything, to contact landowners. If it's a zone change, then yes. If it's just in the general plan, I don't feel as big a need to.
And being sensitive to the idea that certainly a landowner like these folks here would need to be contacted before we talk about that kind of a change.
A zone change.
Well, and even the general plan amendment, I've had that conversation, so that they're not blind to it. Now, I think it's entirely appropriate to consider the neighborhood to the north and the idea that we want to expressly put them on notice. I think that makes perfect sense. But I don't want you to feel like I'm suggesting we make a change that these folks aren't aware of. So,
It makes sense too, Dave, to try and keep more of our commercial and mixed use closer to Highway 6 than to bring it to the north.
quite probably. I think access is going to be a key priority for anybody to do something other than residential development. And in either direction, in fact, to the west, access goes away, right?
Yeah.
And the further that you go to the east, the worse that. So I mean, and I'll tell you, it's anybody's guess as to what somebody might want.
And that is an interesting road that goes east from there. There's several other things that are on there now, and some landowners there,
Little different land uses, right? And
yes,
things.
that will be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's gonna be a big change, and I think when we were discussing that before, there was a discussion about this being the main intersection on the east side of Spanish Fork.
Without a doubt.
This is,
That's a good way to characterize
this is
it.
without a doubt, you know, where this is likely to take place, and it'd be pretty foolhardy not to think that some of this would end up being commercial property at some point in time, but
Yeah.
I don't think I'm ready to make that jump right now.
So another
Although I
question
might
for
in the
you.
future.
Do developers look at a general plan and see what's designated as commercial or mixed use? And does that have sway in their decision as to whether to develop in that area?
I think that we've got one that could comment on that. Better maybe, not to speculate. And of course, folks in the development community, they don't all work the same way. But I think the priorities would be, what's visible, what kind of access does something have, what are traffic patterns, and some of those key priorities. And then sort of the regulatory things that are in place, whether it's a general plan or zoning. Oftentimes, I think those are considered after the key characteristics are in place, and they look at it from that perspective. It doesn't matter what it's zoned if somebody can't make money with whatever they want to use the property for down the road. I think the other fundamentals, I think, are a much bigger deal for somebody than zoning, and that's really just an offshoot of what a general plan says and that type of a thing.
So with this being on the road that it is, the location that it is, whether it stays as a state in the general plan, or if we change it to mixed use or whatever, if a developer looks at the map and says that'd be a great place for my business or to build this, they're gonna approach the city regardless of what the general plan says it is.
Right, now,
They'll get it under contract and then approach the city.
yeah. If the general plan is changed to, help you and the city council feel comfortable that proposed zoning is consistent with the general plan, then you could say that there's one step removed that they otherwise would have to go through. So in that respect, I think some folks would look at it as favorable if the city's vision is consistent with what they want to do. And that's why I brought it up, is just from that perspective. But and also just another thing that I'll mention that I think syncs up well with the concerns that I'm hearing about maybe going beyond just changing the designation for the city's property on the west side of 2550 East. I think rightfully so. Typically, the commission and the city council have taken the position that the bar is high for changing the general plan. And I think that's the way that it should be, and I appreciate that. And again, I think that again matches well with what I'm hearing.
Okay. I think based on just some consensus here, we probably would be wise to leave that additional idea off the discussion and address really these two proposals. Let's see, this is going to be a public meeting, but is there any comments from the commissioners before we go into a public hearing? Okay, we'll go ahead and go into public hearing. If there's anyone that, in the audience that'd like to come up and mention your name? No. Thanks for asking, though. Anyone? So we're talking about the public hearing for both of these proposals? Yes, both of them together.
Hi, I'm Jenny Martineau, and I'm the neighbor to the north.
Okay?
So I've been up here before. Moore wanted to be here tonight, but circumstances didn't allow it. So anytime that we're talking about this little corner of our world, you'll be seeing somebody from the neighbors to the north.
Good, good.
First, I just want it on record. I love the Olsons. I love their sheep farm. It breaks my heart to think that they want to sell it and start moving on. Obviously, we have concerns. We still have those same concerns that we had 2-3 years ago. And that intersection, I don't know if any of you live up there or close to it, how often you drive through it, but there are accidents in that intersection, and I get it, right? There's some down here by the McDonald's and the Burger King, right? But up here, because of the speed of that road, is crazy. You have accidents galore up there. You also have crazy teenagers that love to race up, down 2550 East. You have those same teenagers that are using Spanish Fork Parkway to access the high school without a care in the world. It does not make sense to me to put a convenience store there when you have kitty corner to it, that Walmart convenience store on the corner along with the Walmart grocery store. And since this whole big plot of land on the south side is already commercialed with lots more room to grow, because even though there's a strip mall going in there, there's still a lot of room to build over there. It does not make sense to start talking about commercial on the other side of the highway when you have a train to deal with, unless you're planning to move those trains, which was discussed 2-3 years ago. Being next to that train, I see how much that track is used daily, along with the other track running through Mapleton area. I see that track as well. It does not make sense to me. If there was guarantee that it was be a nice little office building, I'm down for that. That'd be great. But in a convenience store, I call them stop and robs for that very reason, having lived in California and lived right next to one. It sat on the corner. I was equivalent of about 6 houses away from it. You could plan on it being robbed quite often. And where this is on Highway 6, easy access, it concerns me. We have a gas station up the road at Chevron. We have one there at Walmart. We have one down farther at Center Street. We have gas stations. So to say that we need a gas station because there isn't one close by is a bunch of hooey. So, and convenience, drive 10 more seconds across the road and you've got your convenience. Doesn't make sense. Those neighbors to the north, we're a little isolated right now. We have that large land owned behind us, where the pumpkin patch has been this year, is what I'm talking about. We have a church currently right there that just went up this last year, and it's pretty isolated. And there's already a lot of stuff that happens just at that church that brings questionable behavior into the neighborhood. And so it raises that concern even more for the commercial being developed there along the highway. I get it. Sure, it seems great, right? On paper, it looks amazing. I think in actuality, it's going to be a heartache. It's going to be a nightmare. Unless you'd like to move Maple Mountain High School, you're going to have that traffic alone to deal with. Yeah, I just think we've already got issues along Rio Grande Drive with traffic there, theft in the neighborhood. I mean, we had a suicide at the church. You've got a lot already going on in that neighborhood right there to invite through convenience stores potential mischief is not something that we as neighbors are on board for.
So Jenny, have you seen what you can put in a C2 area? Have you looked on our
Yeah, they're the smaller little, and that's why I say, if you've got a little office
well,
building,
can you put that up?
if you've got an office building,
What you
I'd
can
be
put for- yeah,
great
what
for
you can
that.
put For C2?
The concern for me really are your convenience stores. That just,
So
it's like a four-letter word for me.
what if it were high-rise apartment buildings?
Ooh.
Just to give an example.
No.
So convenience store or high-rise apartment
Yeah.
buildings.
We don't, right, the high density, because we were here a few months ago when we were talking with the little guy that wanted to build the senior residences, okay? I was there for that one. Yeah, the high residency is concerning as well. Just because a lot of turnover, right? And I know it's trivial, but you got to think about property value. We built our homes, we bought those homes because of the location. It was a great investment. But the second you invite commercial and high-density residential, that starts going down. So that's a concern, and it's a concern amongst many in our neighborhood. Any other questions?
There you go. This is what you put in the C2 area.
And most of those I would be fine with. Most of those I would.
So what would you suggest putting there then?
I don't know. If I had that answer, I could stand here and say, you need to do this. But all I'm asking is, please
So we
think.
have owners here that own this property.
Right, and I love them. They're sitting right over there. I love them.
And they want to sell the property.
And it's
have
their
it-
right to.
Yeah. So there's what we can put on a C2
Okay.
compared to a high-rise or something else that you don't like either.
So C2, if that's all that you've got for C2, I think we're okay. But the second you start talking convenience store, that's when you see me here.
There's a convenience store there.
Oh, there it is, number 4.
It could happen.
I went right over it.
It could happen, but
See,
there's.
that's my concern.
That would be the developer. and-
All other 20 on there look great.
So
So
shouldn't
I guess
it
we
be,
flip a coin, huh?
Yeah.
shouldn't it be,
Can you reclassify convenience
so
store?
I know the city's not the one that goes out and says, hey, we want a convenience
Right,
store here or there.
right.
Shouldn't it be the property owner's risk and
is.
decision to decide
It is.
if the city's already had that zoning, which we have for
Right.
years, mixed use or whatever it is, shouldn't it then be the property owner's
Right, and it's
choice? to
totally
make
their
that
choice. If they want to sell off to a Maverick or whatever, that is completely their choice. I'm just stating, this is gospel according to Jenny. Yeah. So there's my concerns.
Thank you, Jenny.
What was that again?
Nope.
Stop and rob? Is that what you call that?
I call them stop and robs.
I've never heard that before. I'll have to write that one.
Live in California, and you will. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
My name's Jamie.
Hi, Jamie.
I'm a neighbor to the north. I've never spoken to anything like this, so I'm really nervous. So if there's a puddle here when I'm done, I apologize in advance. I think the biggest question we need to ask ourselves is, when we put, say, a convenience store there, who does that really serve? Are convenience stores really relevant anymore? Typically, they're higher priced goods that you can get at other places. And those other places are readily available in this town, right across the highway, for one, and several other locations in town. My biggest concern is the property there is, what is it, the southeast corner of potentially, I don't even know, 100 acres of farmland, some other things scattered in between. And I just think it's a little reckless to approve small plots of land with these great big surroundings, not knowing the potential for what can happen. If we can change the zone now, why can't we change the zone next week? Why can't we change the zone next month? Why can't we do it next year, 5 years, 10 years, whenever? It's still all up in the air, right? Zones can always be changed.
Yeah.
So I just think it's a little reckless to pull out smaller plots of land when we have this whole big picture to consider. I'm not generally opposed to high-density housing in general, but I think it's reckless to take a small plot of land in this huge, vast landscape and designate it as high density, because then what's going to happen with the rest of it? It only takes one little tiny thing to ignite a fire. What's going to happen with the rest of the land? Who is this convenience store or whatever, what we're putting into our city, who is that serving? Is it benefiting the community, or is it detrimental to the community? Or does the community just not really even care about it? I think those are the questions that we should be thinking about and considering. So, I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jeannie.
John, you was not nominated spokesperson.
You picked the gabbiest one of the bunch.
My name's John Olson. I just want to make a couple of clarifications. The owner of this piece of ground that's being considered is not here. We are her sons, but she is not here.
Okay.
So we utilize the ground, and we do run our sheep there, and you see us coming and going a lot, but it's Mom's ground. It's also my mother's 401k plan and her retirement plan. That's what Dad did his whole life, was work the farm, invested in ground in hopes that it would appreciate better than a 401k plan would in the marketplace. We did not solicit the sale of this ground. We were approached and asked if we would consider it. And due to the current financial circumstances of my mother, it's time to start taking distributions from her 401k plan. And I'm pretty sure that there's nobody in this town that would come to her and say, you know what, no, you can't take distributions on your 401k plan. Nobody would want anybody else telling them how to do it. So it does make sense to at least the owner of the ground. And it makes sense to those people who have put a plan together and proposed it to come in and put in a combination convenience store, gas station, whatever they're going to do. The Olsons are in no hurry to move or get out of the sheep business. And they will be relocating just a little bit further to the east or wherever we can make things fit. I like the time that the commissioners took to distinguish the difference between a general plan amendment and a zoning change. The picture over here with the two mixed uses, the smaller circles, if you go back through the historical records, and I may be wrong, but I believe that change was made in the general plan about 10 years ago. I think this group that's up here has to have vision of what the future of Spanish Fork is. And to consider making changes as this is planning for the future of the town. And that's different than a zone change. Currently, the general plan says mixed use. Currently, the zoning is rural residential. Yes, we have to make changes. The town, the homes that these individuals live in to the north was once not even rural residential. And part of the ground that they live on is ground that my dad cashed in as part of his 401k plan to allow citizens to come into town and to establish homes in the places that they want to establish homes. The high school to the north was once owned by Mom and Dad. And He chose to sell the ground knowing that it was going to go into residential that ultimately was traded to put a high school in there. Even the little public facility, the power station there, a portion of that was owned by Dad, and the city approached him about buying that ground from him to put in the power substation and potentially the fire station in the future. Things change. You guys need to be visionaries and see where this town is going to go and what needs to be considered at that intersection as it continues to grow and develop over the years. I think that's all I'm going to say tonight.
Well said, John. Thank you.
John.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Commissioners, comments or questions?
I was on the city council 10 years ago when the Olsons came to me. I remember Brother John coming up to me and he's telling me how much he thinks his ground was really worth in that, during that days when we bought that piece of property from him. And he was right. It was worth that much, and it's been a good asset to the community for what we wanted to do with it. I know a lot of people that has bought ground to use for their 401ks, for their retirements. Barbara's in my ward. I love her like a mother. She's really a special woman, and it's really time to have her start to have these type of assets. And our vision in the city council back then, and I think the vision now, that this was going to be commercial in this area. We talked to them about that and back 10 years ago, and the vision is to continue to try to follow Highway 6 with as much commercial as we possibly could at the time, and I think it's a prime area for that. I feel for the people, you know, up on the north side of them, the residents. But again, I think areas like this need to have commercial areas and developments like that. And that's what my feelings are, and that's what we've sort of visioned that this area would be, you know, 10 or 12 years ago before even them houses were built.
Questions or discussions?
No, I agree. For the reasons stated, I mean, it's the intersection, Highway 6, railroad, everything there. It's a good candidate for commercial.
Yeah, there's a reason it's in the general plan, and it's been that way for years. It's a good location, and knowing what 2500 East is going to become, Spanish Fork Parkway, that road expanding and growing, you know, like it or not, that's going to become a more busy road than what it is today. And being as close to Highway 6 as it is, I think it makes sense that whoever it was years ago, designated it as mixed use in the general plan. And I think it makes sense today if there's an opportunity there, and somebody wants to take that risk and develop and put a convenience store on there, that it makes sense that we give them that opportunity.
I think that, to confirm what I said before, this is one of the last, it is the last major intersection on Highway 6 east of Spanish Fork that has this ability. There's only one other intersection, and it's a whole different ball game there. And we have to have the vision to take a look at this. And I know that the discussion when Walmart came up and made their pitch for another grocery store, there was a lot of people who talked about that and said, man, well, heck, you can go down the road a few miles and you're right there at another grocery store, or several of them. But it is a busy place now. And a lot of residents from both sides of Highway 6 shop there. I shop there. Not all the time, but I shop there occasionally. And so I think it would be very short-sighted to not have this as mixed use and allow commercial development along here. I think how much ground ends up in commercial use is something that can be discussed later, but I think this is a good proposal.
Okay. I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing I'd say maybe to the first Jamie and Jenny is, you know, as I've been on the Planning Commission for 5 years, I see these intersections pop up at other places in town, and because of the infrastructure and the traffic, they just become good places for buffer areas to have retail and commercial, maybe some higher density, and then getting into residential. It just makes sense. All communities do that. You'll see that down at I-15 and Benjamin. As that area grows, you're going to have them buffers and things change. It just makes sense to have good transportation. So as you study things that are going on in communities, you'll see this is very, very typical. Dave, could you just validate how long that might have been mixed use? We heard maybe 10 years. Has it been, would you say it been then, or maybe a little longer, as from a general plan standpoint?
What we're seeing here, we first started talking about it, I think, in 2007 or 8.
Okay.
It took more than a year to get that document adopted. So I think it was about 2010 when that was adopted.
9 or 10
What I
years.
don't remember is what was on the general plan before then. I know on the south side of US 6 prior to that, there was land identified for non-residential uses. There might have been on the north side as well. I don't remember.
Okay.
So it could go back certainly more than 10 years.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So Commissioners, we got 2 proposals. If somebody wants to make a motion, again, the one is to change the general plan to the mixed use where it's public facilities here right now. That's one change for the general plan. The other one would be the zone change for the one here to be zoned C2. So is there any commissioners that would like to make a motion on this?
I'll make a motion that we recommend the general plan amendment from public facility to mixed use on the Spanish Fork City property.
Okay,
I'll second it.
got a motion and a second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Do we have a second motion for the zone change?
Kevin?
Yes. Make a motion for changing the zoning from rural residential to mixed use. C2?
C2.
Yeah, okay. Rural residential to C2 on the designated properties, along with any recommendations or findings from the DRC.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I did not ask if there was any opposed on either issue. Is there any opposed? Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, the motion was made based on the exhibit that we're showing there.
Yeah,
So
the
that's what we'll
designated,
put in
yeah,
city council.
designated
So that
properties.
includes the city parcel as well?
Yes.
Okay, for the zone change and the general plan?
Yeah, general plan
Yes.
for the city and then the zone change for all of the designations.
Thanks.
Tyler, did you want to talk?
I think they've covered everything that I would have, but thank you.
I appreciate him being here.
Okay, we'll move on to the next topic is River Point amended preliminary plat. And these next 2 items are actually not public hearings, correct? Correct. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
So for both of the next 2 items, the preliminary plats, typically you're the land use authority for preliminary plats, but in the case that they're master plan developments, the city council is. So we'll ask you tonight to make a recommendation either to approve or deny these requests. And for both of them, I could get into the weeds a little bit. I'm going to try not to. The proposal here is really straightforward. The layout does not change, in my view, in any significant way. The applicant has found that these lots that are on the south side of the Spanish Fork River, this is immediately west of the River Cove development here. With their current proposal, the lots are narrower than they would like them to be, as they're finding folks would like to fit wider homes on the lots. Probably not something that would maybe surprise you about that location. So they've included some additional land in this part of what would be the plat if this amendment's made, and that gives them the ability to widen the lots that are here, in essence, without changing the density at all. Now, it comes with a catch. Right now, this space is in the floodplain. I mean, squarely in the 100-year floodplain. So before that could be developed, they would have to go through a map amendment and do some physical work to the land itself before they could construct homes on those lots. In fact, I think it's very appropriate for the city staff's position that we really don't have any business approving a plat that includes those lots. That is, this is a preliminary plat. This is a vision for how the development will be constructed. Developers typically will build projects like this in phases. So in fact, right now there's one plat that's been approved. Final plat approval for this area right here has been granted. I would recommend that this plat not be approved until they've addressed that FEMA issue. And that's coming from the perspective of, there's some unknowns there, and until everything's buttoned up, I think we need to proceed with some caution. But that being said, that's really the only thing that's a little bit different. This project is, I think, about as unique as a master plan development in the R112 zone could be. Again, to reiterate some history that I don't really want to belabor, but this was a construction landfill. You could say it is still a construction landfill. It's being reclaimed. The effort that has been undertaken there, they've exceeded $1 million worth of expense in trying to reclaim this property and get it to where it can be used in this fashion. And again, with this being an amendment, we have approved this project, so there are parameters in place. We have consultants that are on the scene regularly relative to the remediation and reclamation work that's going on. I just mentioned that, it's kind of maybe a reminder, just a little bit more background relative to what it is, to acknowledge we know what it is. And it's my understanding that by and large, that reclamation work has gone pretty well. The developers actually expanded and gone beyond the particular scope that was set up for them to follow with the reclamation, I think largely because it ended up being easier for them to reclaim, that is to remove all of the debris down to native soil, instead of doing that just underneath roads and just underneath home sites. By the time they got to a certain depth, it just made sense to follow a much broader swath. So in fact, I think ultimately the vast majority of the site that is in any way, shape, or form connected to that landfill is going to be touched. Garbage is going to be removed. I don't really want to get in the weeds, but some of the material that's coming out, the concrete and things like that, they actually can reuse. And that, I think that's beneficial in a lot of different ways, and they're doing that. Certainly a lot of the work as well, though, involves taking stuff to landfills and that kind of transportation. But that being said, again, the proposal is relatively simple and straightforward, just modifying to impact the lots there that are adjacent to the river. Touch on a couple of more details. Maybe Mike, if you can go to I think it's just the next slide, or even the slide after that. It's just the plat. Let's go to the next one. The applicant has requested that we consider reducing the rear setback down to 20 feet, and some of the other setbacks. This is not atypical for master plan developments. The one concern that the Development Review Committee had, if I remember correctly, had to do with the side setbacks. Is that right?
I think it's vice versa. So the side setbacks traditionally are 10 and 10. And so what the applicant, Mr. Adams here is requesting is the ability to do 5 on one side and 10 on the other, but then the adjoining lot would not have a 5 to 5 back. So it'd be, instead of 20 feet between homes, you potentially could have as close as 15, but no less than 15, which I think the DRC was comfortable with. There was some concern as far as the rear setback going from 25 down to 20, if that was needed or not. And then in addition to this, there are a few lots on the south side of the river that was discussed possibly reducing.
Brandon, you need to come up and talk.
Sorry. I was too comfortable over there.
Well, you look comfortable. That's why we got you up here.
Yeah. Mike, if we can go to the plat, I think it's on the. And the applicant is here, so if he wants to correct. So what he's looking for is the ability to reduce the side setbacks here. And so currently, as shown, you'd have a 10-foot setback, side setback here, as well as a 10 here, which would result in 20 between the homes. To accommodate a larger style home, larger footprint, he's looking to reduce that to 15, but what he's willing to do is spell out that you can't have a 5 next to a 5 and then a 10 on that side. So if this one's a 5 on lot 16, then 15 by default will need to have this side be 10. The other request he's looking at is the rear setback would go from 25 down to 20. And then the DRC did recommend looking at these lots here. You can see this dashed line, which is the 60-foot building setback required from the river bank, which is the solid line. As you can see from this exhibit, that drops down pretty dramatically in lots 5, 6, and 7, which I believe the DRC was comfortable with recommending that those 3 lots potentially have a reduction from the livable area down to 15. And so currently, your garage would still need to be back 25 feet, so we don't have an impact from somebody parking in their driveway and that blocking or overhanging into the sidewalk. But the livable areas, such as a porch or a front room, potentially could be pulled up closer to the property line without creating as much as an impact. And their justification for that was the fact that those lots are impacted so dramatically by this 60-foot setback from the bank of the river.
So Brandon, I know it's our construction standards to have geotech studies on all these pieces of property. Will there be something special involved in these where they've got so much garbage and debris in it, or how?
Yeah, and it actually has been taking place. And so as, Director Anderson indicated, we have had
Well, we don't know who it is.
Mr. Anderson, Dave Anderson. We have had staff on site, and Mike Clark, engineering, could actually speak to that better than I could, as far as how close the city has worked with the applicant, Mr. Adams, here, in making sure that the recommendations have been followed as far as compaction, removal, sorting, what kind of materials are appropriate to be left and utilized under the roads, and things of that nature. And then we also will have some soils reports, obviously, for each individual home as they're built, but then, as Dave Anderson indicated, the areas that would be in the floodplain, obviously we'd want additional geotechnical information on that as it comes to fill and compaction that would be potentially brought on for those lots.
Brandon, did you or Dave or anybody go to the neighborhood meeting when this plat was presented?
No, nobody from the city.
Okay. So I know one of the concerns, when this came up initially, I remember some of the neighbors that live here came up and spoke. One of the concerns they have is that basically this neighbor, as you drive down the road and hit this neighborhood, that it doesn't all of a sudden look drastically different from what they've already got. So my question is, by adjusting these setbacks, how is that gonna change the appearance of what this neighborhood would look like as compared to the already existing neighborhood?
This is just speculation, but I would assume most people aren't gonna have keen enough eye that they're gonna notice that, hey, these houses might be a little bit closer together. I think the idea is allowing for a larger footprint, larger home to be on the lot, and so I think the applicant's appeal or desire is specifically to accomplish that. So you don't have a drop in quality, you don't have a drop in character, a drop in neighborhood attraction, but.
Make it so that you can still get a good-sized home on the property. Okay.
And so where he had the room to shift the lot lines, he's doing that, but then the areas further south, a way to accomplish those larger footprints would be to look at a reduction in the setbacks. And as far as the master plan development, the city code spells that out as an option. The applicant can come before the planning commission and city council and say, here's our type of design, here's what we're trying to look for, and the city code does give them the option to say, you know, it's in your purview to look at reducing from the traditional setbacks that are spelled out in the development table.
I know, Dave, you mentioned we're not really talking about this tonight, but usually when you look at a road, you imagine that road to be fairly flat and level, but right here, right where this roundabout is, this drops quite a bit. So I'll be curious to see, with the drop in elevation that exists right here, how you'll be able to deal with that road. You're gonna fill and bring it up?
To bring it out of the floodplain.
Okay.
Just to give us some perspective, Mr. Adams, about how many feet?
Oh, it's where the home goes, where the home will be built, the actual building pad, it's probably 15 feet that has to be built up there. Yeah.
Much.
It's a big drop.
And we'll build it up so it's good and solid, so somebody come put their footings, foundation right there.
Settling or anything like that.
We have to take care of it. We have to have inspectors out there and do soils tests and compaction tests, yeah. Yeah, it'll be very expensive to do that.
And I see that is in phase 4. I guess that's knowing that it's going to take more time to get to that
Hey,
point.
yeah. Mhm. We're starting on it right now, but, you know, it's a government process, so who knows? It's going to be a beautiful subdivision. There's going to be estate homes in there, and it's, you know, I think the neighbors will be very pleased with what we do.
And while you're up here, I have a question for you. What, if you can go back to the yellow presentation, Mike? Yellow. It's the slide right there. What is this?
That is a lot that is included in the plat, but we don't own. The seller of the land, of a portion of the land, lived there. She has now sold it to a granddaughter. And so to make it legal, we needed to make it into a formal lot, but it'll just be kept with them.
Not part of your.
That's why it looks larger. It's an older home that faces that road, and
Okay.
to make it
that's what I
legal, we
was
need
trying
to
to understand.
include that as part of the plat.
Okay, thank you.
Really a part of the project in name only
Yeah.
is what you would, now, maybe to the question about consistency with the neighborhood to the east, you've looked more recently than I have at your CCNRs and the requirements for the home construction, that type of thing. But that is something that we've been pretty concerned about, I think for the reason that you brought up. We really don't want to see any recognizable difference. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to chat about there.
In terms of price per square foot, this will be higher. There may be a little more diversity in styles. The big thing now, you know, you see a lot of modern homes kind of become very popular. So I kind of like a subdivision that has a good mix. Not that they'll be cheap, It'll be fairly expensive. They'll be nice looking. I mean, these lots are very expensive for this day and age. And
So could you
You're
give
just
us
not
an
gonna get
estimate
cheap.
on the river lot? What's the cost of just a lot on the river?
you're probably starting around 180. Mhm. So you're not going to get cheap homes there. You just couldn't do that, yeah. And like Dave mentioned, we'll have CCNRs, we'll control it, just so it's good quality and the neighbors will be proud of it.
Okay, thank you. So these setbacks and things are obviously, Brandon, part of the recommendation, right? Okay. Any questions, Commissioner?
I have a question for Dave. You mentioned at the beginning that those lots on that fifth phase, that you wouldn't be comfortable with approving this plat until that was addressed. So are you saying that you would be more comfortable with delaying the decision on this until that is, or are you saying that we could approve it with the condition that those things be taken care of before that phase is proposed?
The latter.
Okay.
Does that make
Just wanna
sense?
make sure. Yeah, it
And
makes perfect.
Our nomenclature sometimes is something we can trip up on. The plat, there are two plats, so to speak. This is the first of the two. This is the preliminary plat. And like we can see from the phasing plan, typically a developer doesn't come in and build all of the streets you'd have in a 50 or 60 or so lot subdivision at once, at least in our part of the world. And what I'm suggesting is that going ahead and acting and making a recommendation on the approval of the whole thing, I think makes good sense. But I think it also makes good sense that we would not approve the next step on that particular phase of the development until the floodplain issue is resolved, so.
Thank you.
That's phase 4, right?
5. Oh, 4. Well, I thought on the other one was, oh, excuse me, this is 4.
Any other comments or questions? I'd entertain a motion.
I would make a recommendation that this preliminary plat, amended preliminary plat be approved on the conditions and findings of the staff.
Okay, got a motion? We have a
I'll second it.
Second from Commissioner Argyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We got one more of these, right?
Yep,
Okay.
same neck of the woods, River Cove, a little bit to the east of what we just talked about. I think I'll just maybe focus on kind of the before and after here. This is the currently approved layout for the River Cove master plan development. As you can see where this street connects like other streets do. The proposal is to, instead of making that connection, obviously, have this cul-de-sac installed here. I'll let the applicant speak to all the specific reasons that they want to do that for. I think a significant one from my perspective has to do with the buildability of some of the lots in the project, given the presence of a pretty sizable power corridor that runs right through there and the width of the easement associated with that. As we looked at this as staff, we think this is a very, very appropriate change to make from the perspective of really making the development work as well as it could, given some of those constraints. Obviously, proximity to the river, floodplain, our requirements for having structures set away from the river and different things like that. This new design makes it a lot easier to site homes on the lots. And as staff, we've talked about some things. And again, I'd kind of categorize them as weeds, trail design, and different things of that sort. And just maybe to touch on that, what's proposed with this plat is the development of an asphalt path here, kind of a loop, through space that would be dedicated to the city, that would really serve two purposes. I think there is a recreational component of that. Really, I think more importantly here, though, as we found a couple of different times in the last 10, 11, 12 years, there are times when it's very, very important to get equipment on the bank of the river to protect property. And that's very important for that. And that asphalt area, that path, would be part of that as well. But this proposal comes to you with a recommendation for approval from the Development Review Committee, and not totally routine, but very consistent with things that you've made recommendations on before.
So, Dave, I got a question for you. I was gonna ask this last time, just forgot. So talking about the path, just real quick. First of all, I love this a lot more than this. The reason why is because I live right there. So I definitely like that this kind of stops and curves and you don't have this straightaway coming anymore. So really, really like the change. But that's not my question. My question is, with the trail that you'd be putting in here then, the asphalt trail that eventually will come over and tie in with the bridge that's right here, who maintains the city's trails or these paths like this during the winter time if it gets snowed on or whatever? What's the maintenance on those?
It's city property. It's a city facility. The city maintains it.
Okay, so with that, my question is, and I wonder, because a lot of my neighbors have always asked me, what do you know about the bridge that's going right here? And I always tell them there's not a bridge going there. I don't know where you heard that or what. So my question then to the city is, why not put a bridge that ties into an already existing path that's right here, rather than create a new one that will need to be maintained? You'd still have this access to get back here if you needed to. You could remove this one probably if you've got a bridge here. But the biggest thing is now you've got these river properties, which we just heard are very expensive, nice properties that have a walking trail in their backyard that separates them from the river. And if I were investing in one of these properties, I'd be willing to pay more money to put a bridge in rather than to have people walking in my backyard and cutting that access to the river. So what are your thoughts on that?
A couple of different things. I've never heard anybody suggest that an additional bridge be constructed through here. So that's new to me. Maybe that has been talked about with other city staff, but that's new. Bridges are great, I think. They're expensive. They're great. I mean, we could talk about connectivity in a lot of different contexts relative to trails, but that's new. Now, maybe to the other issue, which might be more critical, because I don't know what would necessarily stop the city maybe from building a bridge at some point in the future. I think that certainly could be considered. That space between private property and the river, I bet to a person, developers would love, every one of them, to have lots designed so that they go all the way to that bank of the river. And that, to some extent, has happened in the past. In fact, if we look at other parts of River Cove, that has happened. And
Which they don't own that property. It's still a city easement, is that right?
Well,
Even though they've put,
it's what you just said. There is an easement there. They own the property.
okay, but there is a city
And
easement.
that creates genuine problems. That has created enough problems for us in the short history that we have, right? I mean, 15 years ago, there wasn't development here. And in the lifespan of a neighborhood, and from that perspective, that's not very long, right? Homes will be here for something more than 100 years. And we've already had significant issues trying to protect that property during flood events with an easement in place versus having publicly owned property that we could get on with equipment and that type of a thing. And I can't necessarily speak for the actual city employees that have had to deal with those issues and the property owners and that type of a thing. but I'm in enough meetings and I hear enough to know that those experiences are things that we absolutely don't ever want to go through again. And the best way to avoid that, I think we've concluded, is to have public space between private property and something like a river. And I'll also say, I think that, this is me speaking, and again, I know others would have different perspectives, but things like rivers, maybe access to mountains and different things like that, there is something public, or something that could be considered public relative to those assets, and providing access to those types of things, I think is important. I think they're important enough that making sure that access to those types of features is protected and guaranteed, that what we're talking about here makes good sense from that perspective as well. And again, other people might feel differently, but that's what I know of kind of the situation, a little bit of the history. And
Which makes sense. So what you're saying basically is that trail is the city's way of letting those property owners know your property does not extend past this point.
you know, there is that component of it as well, and demarcating that line between the private lot space and the public space. Again, you guys had a really long meeting last month. I'm trying to maybe be more succinct tonight, but we've spent quite a bit of time discussing with Mr. Mendenhall, how do we do that? What's the most appropriate way to delineate that line, and to provide those property owners with options, but also to be clear about where the private space ends and the public space stops. We've also had issues in situations where private property owners next to public space tend to migrate and to occupy and to claim public space. Sometimes that's no big deal, but occasionally that's become a really big deal also. So just making sure that that line is clear when the homes are built, the first time people move in, and from then forward, that's something we're trying to do as well.
Another question then, because I didn't see it on the previous plan, which those lots go up to the river as well. Does the city have plans then as well to put a trail behind those lots to differentiate or let them know where the...
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've had a similar conversation here, but not the same. And it has largely to do with, I think, what exists here relative to this being at a really different grade than what we have here, and the absence of any kind of facility here.
Nothing to tie into.
There's really not, but you'll also see these. So the access will be the same to the same amount of space from the bank of the river back to the private property as what we're talking about on River Cove. And there will be a path there, at least initially. It will not be an asphalt path. It'll be road base or something like that. Simply because we don't anticipate this getting used like the River Cove trail could, given that it will connect to the bridge and different things. But we've also been very clear with the developer of this project that that could change. You know, the city easily could asphalt that space at some point in the future and build that facility. And I think that's important to consider now and to plan for, and just to make sure that that option's open if it ever does make sense. In fact, you know, we had on one of the images the fencing that this developer is proposing to construct adjacent to that, well, on that property line, this right here, by way of what they're proposing to do to demarcate that line. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, could you kind of zoom over that area, kind of illustrate? I'm kind of interested where this is from that other bridge. And Dave, is what dictates some of these bridges and things? I mean, is that the trail, the Parks and Recreation?
I think it's history now, really. When Quail Hollow was developed, this is before my time, so I could be wrong. It's the project that's to the south of River Cove, if you will, kind of over here. I think it's the developer of Quail Hollow that built this bridge.
Is
Does
this
that
the
have
one, is
utility
this the one we're
capacity?
talking about right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And then
that's-
this is the other one.
So for example, this bridge here was not only built to provide a pedestrian path across the river, but also there are utilities in that bridge.
Oh,
So sometimes that is a factor relative to how these kinds of things come about. I think,
what's this yellow showing, Mike?
Different type of trail. It's a trail master plan type line. I can turn that off.
Okay. No, that's all right.
Anyway, that shows all the utilities. Kind of running a little slow.
we don't, that I'm aware of, we've never talked about, and I started to say, I don't think we have, for example, a prescribed frequency for bridges across the river and that type of thing in any documents.
This one had a lot of reasons. I mean, utilities for one, but you've got this big sports park that could allow people to,
And, it's fairly, in fact, it looks like it's really
right
close
in the
to
middle.
equidistant from other
If
crossings.
the developer's gonna pay for it, why not, right?
And in this case, I don't think they had any choice if they wanted to get access to water. And so
I see. Okay.
Then there's the road here as well. If you're looking at the equidistant, one here, one here, one here.
This is not floodplain, is it? Is that set aside for
This is-
parks or something?
This was dedicated to the city, I think largely because it was not developable, it's floodplain.
Because of water?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Funny what land we get, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes.
Where Tyler West is right across from
okay, that makes sense why that wasn't developed too. Okay, that helped, thank you. You're awesome, Mike.
Another, and he touched on, big deal is being able to access it from both sides. The backhoe can only reach so far, and some of those low-lying areas on the north side, if you get down in there, you'll just sink. So being able to reach from the other side, particularly along this stretch, is important, as well as here. Here, you have backyards, it's really hard to get a backhoe into someone's backyard to clear out the river, so we're limited on some areas. So in these two in particular, we want to make an effort. FEMA pushes really hard, the state pushes hard to make sure we have access down to clean it out and maintain it, so.
Okay. We've got the developer here, don't we? Do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, Mike, can you go to the plat?
Oh, no.
One thought that's kind of been a late-breaking issue is
Which one do you want?
when there, Albert, yep. When the prior phases were approved and the preliminary concept was reapproved, right? Specific phases were approved. There was dedication of ground along here, as has been discussed, for the city to own all the way to the river. So there's a 40-foot deeded strip, and there was kind of a random location established for this trail at the time. You know, the roads are now evolving. So this is the land that the city actually owns today. There's some thought that is suggesting that the goal is to get people to this bridge from a pedestrian standpoint, and that it might serve a more practical purpose if it was here between these two lots, get to the bridge, get across this way. And so we wanted to just, we spoke briefly with Mike about that the other day and see if that would make some sense, that in the alternative, this could be conveyed back to the developer. We just add that to both lots, and then we would install the trail access at this point, and then that brings everybody closer to the bridge crossing at this point. Then you have access here, so this is a vehicle-capable route from here on through, right, for cleaning and other purposes. I don't know whether this would need to be vehicle capable. Mike, maybe you have a thought there versus pedestrian only, or?
Either, as long as you have from either end. I don't know if we have a strong opinion.
I sure don't. We could run that by our parks guys.
I mean, we're prepared to go that way, but if it doesn't need to be vehicle capable, we have.
If you can get one in right here, I don't see a reason why you need another one over here.
Yeah, so
And you also have the turning radius of the truck, so you can see you can kind of clip that corner without too much loss to that lot. You talk about a vehicle, a dump truck, something pulling around. starts eating up this. The other thought I had is right here you have limited frontage for lot 12, and 13 is pretty big, but lot 12, you take out 13 feet. It's a pretty big difference here. And right here, it wouldn't matter too much. These lots can shrink a little bit collectively, but on the cul-de-sac, it's a little limited.
Could you get one in right here?
There is one right here.
Yeah, now.
But is it wide enough for a?
Oh, yeah.
Is it?
That's what it's
So
designed.
part of our agreement with the city is that we'll construct the road/trail from this point all the way through and improve it, right? And so the idea is that this comes in now and crosses the bridge, but the vehicle capability really pretty much stops right here.
Oh, really? Yeah, I guess it does because it drops.
So the city will pay for everything through this section, but we'll do it all as part of the same construction project. We'll be dealing with the topography and everything else. And as such, you know, it just seems like this would work great for pedestrian access. This is going to be a little bit difficult from the radius like you're looking at here to try to round these out to make the vehicles get in and out of there anyway. This is really serving as a pedestrian access. Anyway, if it's just as agreeable for the Planning Commission, I know this is late breaking for DRC and for other staff, but if we had that option going forward, we'd sort that out with staff before we go to City Council here in the next couple of weeks, and if that works just as well, we'd probably try to relocate it there.
And my,
No concern. We can talk about that before we go to City Council, see if anybody else does.
there's also no path through here from this side to this side. So if you're lot 20 and want to get to the sports park, your route is here and around. It's a little more out of the way. The farther into the cul-de-sac it goes, the farther out you bring it. It's just a little more accessible, a little more convenient.
That's a big part of the kind of internal analysis, is people basically enter and then have to loop back to get on the bridge versus just more direct to the
Right
bridge.
through. Makes more sense.
Other than that, I think we're in perfect agreement with the proposal as presented.
So I've got one more question while you're there. What's your timeline for, is this the final phase, and what's your timeline on it?
Yeah, well, this had been, I don't know what you have in the way of drawings, but this had been two phases, a phase through here and a phase through here, but we'll do all of this as one phase in the spring.
Okay.
So the idea would be get this approved by City Council, record the plat in January, and probably just build as soon as the weather and circumstances are ideal in spring.
Okay. Any questions or discussion, commissioners? No? Okay, entertain a motion then.
Richard?
If you do make a motion, you might want to address this question that just come up at the very end to challenge the DRC to work on that access prior to the city council.
More or less, planning commission would be amiable to either location based
Yep.
on staff's conclusions, right?
Correct.
Well, I'll make the recommendation that the proposed preliminary plat be approved based on the findings and conditions that have been set forth, and to include that the location of the trail access be worked out with staff.
Access from 550 west to the trail, right, it's a pedestrian access.
Yes.
Before it meets with the council.
Before they meet with city council.
Okay, got a motion?
I'll second.
Second. Commissioner Euler, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Bye, Richard.
Thank you.
You can't.
Let's see, we've got general plan amendment, which is a public hearing for the River Bottoms Vision Plan. That right?
Yes, sir.
Fork City.
Okay.
I want to start by thanking folks for being here again and for the time that I think everybody that's here now took a few weeks ago to come to a meeting or meetings that we had since your last meeting, where we tried to talk through questions and concerns and different things like that. I imagine we probably didn't address everything that people might be thinking about or might be concerned about. But I really, really appreciate everybody's, I felt like it was a very sincere discussion. I didn't necessarily feel like people held back. And that's great. It was very productive for me. And from that, I'd like to touch on a couple of things that we've been talking about as staff that honestly, they don't necessarily have a direct connection to the River Bottoms vision plan. But they connect very directly to some of the concerns that were raised in the meeting. One of them has to do with things that happen in the city that impact their lives. And I'm going to be really candid now. We've got a development that's under construction. It's Annie's Acres. They have shut down South Lane to get utilities to Annie's Acres. It's been shut down now for a month or close to it. 5 weeks. It's even longer than I was thinking. The experience that we've had working with that developer that honestly, in our experience historically, has been one of the better developers that we work with. The experience that we've had nonetheless on that project has been sour enough that we are overhauling the approach that we take in working with developers that need to do things like have a road closure to get infrastructure in place. And I think we all appreciate that there are times when it's unavoidable to close a road. But also, I think those times are fairly rare to where somebody actually has to close a road. And I can't think of very many situations where somebody has to close a road for 5 weeks or much less. That probably it's going to end up being at least 3 or 4 more weeks, I'm hearing now. So in as much as what I'm saying here doesn't do the folks that are impacted by this situation probably any good at all, it is an example of us learning from maybe some poor planning on our part relative to having regulations in place that can do a better job of encouraging developers to get in and get out, or maybe to mitigate the heartburn that comes from having a road closed by having flaggers and putting down steel plates at night, doing different things like that, so that maybe the road is closed hours during a day, but not, for 4 or 8 straight weeks or different things like that. And I really appreciate the effort that our public works departments put into trying to understand better how other cities deal with this issue and making some changes on our part so that, again, we can, and this is really how I look at it, so that we can be more responsible as the authority that does have the ability to regulate some of these types of things. Obviously, it's not a totally new issue. A lot's been built in Spanish Fork. A lot of new infrastructure's been put in place over the years, but particularly this last year, we've had a couple of experiences that have gotten us to the point where we know we have to do some things differently. So I apologize that you guys are living with what you're living with now. And again, I recognize that what we're talking about here probably is not going to help. But I will also say that South Lane, in as much as part of it is passable, is going to be clean. And that I feel fairly confident committing to another issue. 2 other issues that we've had: dust control from the development that's on the north side of South Lane, and just South Lane itself being a quagmire. A developer not keeping that clean, not sweeping it, not washing it off, not grading it, not doing those types of things. This past week, I think they've done a much better job. Somewhat better. I've been out once. Actually, Kim went out once, and we've seen that it looks pretty good to us compared with some other things that we've seen. But my commitment is.
Can you give us an area view of?
So Dave, I got a question about that.
On other things like that, if I can just maybe respond. And I say this recognizing that the road, I understand that somebody's fence was taken down, caused some heartburn. I think it was the McKells.
I guess, it's not ours.
Right, but in addition to and I'm mentioning this just to try to illustrate that we understand that there are other concerns as well. Fences being removed that aren't promptly repaired and replaced. Folks not being notified as to when the road in front of them is going to close. And typically, we do a great job of that as a city when things like that happen.
Where's that
I don't
work?
know.
Is that right in here? That,
Yeah,
That's right in front of my
Yeah.
house.
so that I think is what we're looking at there.
okay.
Um,
So that's all closed to Main Street?
This tree right here
Storm drain.
is this group of trees right here.
That's the
Okay.
one that's right on the corner on that sharp turn.
Yeah.
That's the corner. So from my dad's house up to, from there, it is, well, from up to Bradford's, it's closed down and around to, I'm not sure where it is on the other side. I've not been up that side because you can't get past.
A little realism.
But
But
we
it's-
weren't informed even the day it was closed. I went to go home, I couldn't get home that way. I had to come and go the other way.
From-
They told us
probably
it would
from
be
here?
just a few. And I do have to say, Dave has been great to come and try and problem solve and get things done. R&B construction, on the other hand, has not been so great.
And it goes all the way to Main Street?
Where is it closed on the other side, Dave? I don't know how far it goes down. I think by
Goes to
Mace's.
It goes to right there.
And then cuts
So the
through.
pipe runs from the subdivision up to that line, goes along where the fence was taken out, along the Barrett property, and then into the river over here. This section is right here.
So Barrett's, I guess at the end of Barrett's,
That's-
right there is where it closes on that side, and then on the corner, well, up by, Warner's, Bradford Construction, whatever they wanna call it now, that's where it's closed.
So in construction, when they need to put utilities, do they usually try and do the whole thing at once or on a line as large as this? Or do they usually try and put a little bit in, then they cover it, and then they do a little bit more, and then they cover it?
This is-
I don't know. What's typical construction?
This is the third time our road's been closed.
So the road is 21 feet from side to side as far as asphalt goes, and there's a ditch, fence, et cetera, right on the edge. You can kind of see what it looks like. Fence here, fence here. This is a asphalt paired with some irrigation such stuff.
So
It's-
as of now, Brent McHale can't even access his property. Because it's right, that his gate is, you see where the back, that's a backhoe, isn't it? I don't know what these things are called. That's his gate right there. Right there to get into his property. So he can't even, and he's been trying to bring cows in. So he can't access his property. We can access Dad's, but right now, those trucks are right there, plus huge cement, whatever they're called, I don't know. Which, I mean, we had complained until it got to the point that we were getting rocks like this thrown up on our property, behind my cars in my driveway. Dust was a joke, and like I said, I appreciate Dave, because he's been very good to come out.
I haven't been very effective, I will say that.
What
Yeah.
has been the consequences? I mean, is this project red tag?
Thank you, yeah. No, and that's what we're doing now
Bring the
is,
general contractor's attention.
right,
Stop him
that's
from
how you do
building,
it.
get the developer to start with holding some consequences, LDs against him, and he'll straighten his stuff up real quick.
Right. Right now, we're putting clear parameters in our ordinance to give us a yardstick that we can use to say, you haven't met this criteria, therefore you're shut down. Or maybe it's, you haven't met this criteria, so
So you don't have that?
you're fined X amount of dollars per day, or different things like that.
So you don't have that capability in what you have right now?
It's very loose.
Has this never been, in all the years of development in the city,
It's never
is
been
this
a
a
single,
first?
honestly, we have this project and we have a project on 10th North on the west side of I-15 that this past year, they've both caused different area residents considerable concern. Prior to that, I don't remember anything being this bad where something was shut down for multiple weeks and that sort of a thing. So this, maybe we've just been lucky in the past, but.
Okay.
Have there been, Mike, has there been issues with unforeseen conditions? They've been digging through this, or?
So I've spent a fair amount of time talking to them. I mean, you encourage, you say, all right, what's your schedule next? What are you going to do? They tell you something, you go out, it's not. Anyway, so for example, on this picture alone, there's a culvert up here that they didn't know about. It wasn't shown according to them on their survey.
That's the second time they dug that up.
Okay, I showing you the information I have. And so when they got there, all of this, and you see their trench box, every time they'd go to backfill or go to dig, move it around, all this would collapse and slough off. And they'd have to go pull it back out because they have to meet standards on this fill material here. And so he's spending days and days, and this is a different contractor than RB Construction. They hired Brandon Wilson Excavation to come in and do this. And he says it's the hardest pipe he's put in a very, very long time. And he's out there quite often. They only move a couple, like 6 sticks of pipe a day. And I say sticks, but 36-inch pipe.
Has it got quicksand in it?
Soil's not great. It falls off the sides. He has to clean it out.
High water table.
Well, it's quicksand. I bet it's got a quicksand
So
into it.
it is a difficult line to put in. The other part is you have 36-inch storm drain pipe. You're going to have an 8-inch water line, 8-inch or 6-inch PI line. After this. So this is the first pipe going in. And that one will go from the subdivision all the way out to Main Street. So it'll be a bit longer, but the good part about it is it's a smaller pipe. You can see how big this excavation is. South Lane is, I mean, half gone, more than half gone with this. The other pipes will go on the north, or excuse me, the east side of this. So it'll come on this side.
And they're pressurized.
And they're pressurized. They'll be 4 feet deep. Should go a lot quicker. Should. So again, I'm not trying to defend or anything. I'm explaining as we've been trying to work with them. And Todd, your question on having restrictions as far as if you don't get out by this date, is there fine? We are working on it. It is unique, and 10th North was unique as well on existing homes, existing people using those roads, and then putting in basically a full set of utilities to put a subdivision out a little bit of ways. And it basically takes the whole road because the roads aren't typical 40, 50-foot wide roads. They are 21-foot wide roads with ditches on either side. So there's just a lot going on paired with the contractor not prioritizing schedule, sometimes not being there, sometimes not doing what they said they do. So it's just kind of been a mix, and again, it's tough on the people that have to drive it every day.
So in our commercial work, we have to restore access every day.
Yes.
To
right.
To businesses.
That's not unusual.
That's common on every project. So we can only do that section of work each day. I mean, if we're not complete with it, we still have to, by plates or whatever, we have to restore access. So they're heavy fines. And I don't see why that'd be any different to a community.
I think we feel the same way, and that it should be that way, and the goal is to have that clearly articulated to where that's it. That's not debatable, it's the rule, and that's what people do. And I'm trying to speculate about how there have been thousands and thousands of homes built in Spanish Fork in the last couple of decades, and this seems to really be a big issue right now. I think part of it is with South Lane and 10th North, maybe unlike some other roads, those were built with no utilities in them at all, except for maybe sewer here. That was probably installed well after it was built originally. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe, something like that. 15. Yeah. So that's why it's the whole thing, right? I mean, on a typical street, we have some utilities on one side, some utilities on the other side, and now where they're getting delivered to an area like the west side I-15 where we haven't had anything before. It's just, and it's parallel with the road. It's not just a crossing or something like that. I'm not making excuses or anything, but it does seem odd that a community with our history and development and stuff like that, we're not better prepared maybe to deal with this kind of thing than we are now. And I mentioned that not to open up any concerns or anything like that, but as we talked a few weeks ago, we talked a lot about things in my mind that are kind of like that. We talked about travel speed on River Bottoms Road.
Even with the road closed.
We talked about other things relative to roads that make it hard for people to continue to farm. Travel speed, maybe being one of those, and a handful of other issues that I've talked with other people on staff about. acknowledge those. Honestly, I think to some extent, some of these are probably going to be worse before we get better. But as those concerns come up, we really, really want you to talk to us. Let us know to a person, whether it's our public safety director, city engineer, public works director, whoever it is, if there's something that we can do. I really believe that everybody is on board to do everything that we can. Unfortunately, like in this case, sometimes it takes time to get to where we can maybe do something that's meaningful. But that's not really what we're here to talk about with the River Bottoms vision. But again, we spend a lot of time talking about things like that.
Okay, we've already had one pickup in the middle of good going around that edge. No semi-tires are sitting on that much edge in that 6 foot deep ditch, so we were just asking for it.
And I don't know how to do anything about that. You're talking about just what, because the road's not wide enough or something like that?
Not wide enough.
Okay.
And the cars are going just as fast as.
Can the construction company find different accesses? Does that make sense? Can they find a different access than coming down, is it Bradford Lane? What's that one? Bradford Lane. They have property that's up closer to the, but yet they come down that small road, they caved in one of the ditches there, the pipes that they put in, and we don't know if they fixed it or not, but they just filled it with dirt to access their stuff. Like I said, this is the 3rd time this road has been closed. The first time it wasn't very much. The second time, where you see that backhoe, just beyond that, closer to my dad's property, they put in a big trench. I don't even know, it was a drain system. They were pumping water out of there like nothing else. They're still doing it. That road took them, I'll bet, over a month and a half to 2 months to even asphalt. We had people that would come to our door that had popped tires on that thing. They had had wrecks on the edge of that road because of the construction companies and these trucks. Either time, we've not been informed this road's going to be torn up, it's going to be closed. Basically, we're the only household right there that is getting affected by it. And we haven't complained to Dave until this last time, and when we have a rainstorm, we get flooded with money. They throw rocks, that's what he says, is there some type of different access where they have the property that they're building on, that they can access without running on these small county roads that they're basically ruining. It took me one day, I come home on that Bradford Lane, I sat there for 5, 10, 15 minutes because there were 2 of their semi-trucks parked there and they were stuck. So they had to maneuver them to get them past. Then when the one finally got past, the other one come past me, I couldn't move over or I would have scratched the heck out of my truck and he got mad at me. Another one of their drivers ran into Mylan House's fence, a brick fence on that small road. And I'm like I said, Dave has been awesome. He's the only one that's returned our phone calls. We've tried to call other people in the city that we've been given numbers to, and Dave's the only one that's returned our calls or come out and tried to help. And the only time that this construction company, and I don't know which one it is, would even do anything is when I got out of my car, went and took pictures of the road, took pictures of the dust, took pictures of anything, and then they would come and fix something. Then we'd say, okay, they're gonna do it this day, this day, this day. Never seen anything on those days. I'd go out and take a picture again. Right then and there, they would come and do it. And David talked to one of their workers the other day, and he told him, he says, your wife's been out here taking pictures and we don't want problems.
So Chris,
Yeah,
living there, you see how much work is being done on the road. For it being closed as long as it is, are we talking like 1 or 2?
some days they're there, some days they're not. What do you mean, 1 or
Like
2?
1 or 2 people working? Is it a whole crew? Are they working from sun up to
When I
sundown?
get home from work, especially now with daylight saving time gone, they're never there. They come, we have a couple trucks when I get up, we get ready to go to work. There's a few trucks that are there. There's not been a big extensive crew there working, no. Their trucks come up and down the road faster than you would not believe. And
In fact, I almost got hit by one trying to get around their barricade to our road.
Do you see lights at night? Are they working when it
No.
gets dark? Yeah, so it's
Maybe
just
to
during
talk,
the
and I don't want to necessarily assume what you're talking
day.
about
No, I'm just
there,
curious
but
as to how, for.
how aggressive
for-
they're being.
For this taking as long as it
Yeah.
has, and we've never seen this before, I'm just wondering, they got one guy driving a backhoe, or what is this?
Feels like it.
So that's, I'm
well,
just
that's
curious
it.
as to what
They're
it
not
is.
doing the job they should be doing.
And not
The
only
issue is
that
what
is-
teeth does the city
Right.
have to make them do what they should.
And just relative to what we're talking about, and we'd love input and feedback on the concept, and Mike, maybe like the feet per lane closure per day, you want to maybe talk a little bit about that? And again, this, of course, is not going to
This
necessarily
isn't,
help in this
no,
case, but
and this
do,
is, I know this isn't why we're here, but what you
That's a
guys
serious
keep
concern,
saying,
though.
there's an impact, they're supposed to be fine. What does that do for me? You know, what does that do for us? We have to live there.
So, and I was gonna ask this earlier, in Provo right now, there's a lot of construction, they're putting pipes in front of a lot of commercial businesses that you don't get access to those commercial businesses, so they're basically shut down for a time period. Do they get any kind of reimbursement from the city when the city comes in and shuts down access to their business? Or are they just out those dollars?
you know, on Fifth West, for
Yeah,
example, in
exactly.
Provo,
Yeah.
that is overhauled, but the accesses are open daily
Are
to
they?
the
Some of them
businesses
are.
along there. At least to the majority, and
Yeah,
the
but
ones
there are
that,
some because they come around, I work at the county.
but it's not very long, right? If something's close to a particular property.
Some, I'm not sure how long exactly that they are, but they come around to the county employees and gave us vouchers to go help these companies because they had been closed out. On when they were doing the university, when they were doing the UTA, and some of those businesses you could not access. So they asked us, as at the county buildings and the state buildings, to please come and help those businesses with giving us vouchers that the county had gotten to go help, and then the county the county or the city, state, whatever, would reimburse them for the services that we got, you know, the discounts or whatever. So I do know it affects businesses.
Absolutely. But I
But
think the effort typically is to not close a business access, you know, maybe but for the day that you're going across that drive access or something like that, for reasons that are obvious, you know.
What we typically see, Kevin, when we're doing projects like that, if we leave like this, our projects will be red tagged, and we can't move forward. If we can't move forward, the developer's losing money.
So explain a red tag process to somebody
Construction
who doesn't know.
stops, no one's on that side
Until when?
until that red tag's removed.
And how's it removed?
When the city comes and says, okay, that road's clean now, and you can proceed, or I accept your plan for getting.
How do they clean that road up though if they're red tagged, if that's part of the
You can
process?
still do that, that's still part of the process. You can remedy the situation that causes that problem. Or you're given a fine. You're given a fine for every day you have this road closed, that you're over this limit, that would be a fine. Or construction access. On our site plans, is there not do they not have construction access on their site plans for their drawings showing where they'll access their site?
Yeah, they have a traffic control plan showing where the
Are
signs
they
and such
complying
will
with
be.
that, or is it change? Sounds like it's changing.
Well, one problem is people like to move the signs. We've had that issue where they throw them in ditches. And so then we get complaints, hey, the signs aren't up. We go, they spend an hour out looking for them, find them in a ditch, we put them back up. So not we, the contractor puts them back up. So that's
But often it's
an
public
issue we think
streets,
we have.
that is the construction
I
access.
was gonna say, the signs have never been moved where our guys are.
But the issue here is, I mean, emergency services have got to be able to get to their house.
They can barely. I will have to admit that they can, but barely. And we have a trailer in my dad's yard right now. If we wanted to access and take that trailer out to go, we couldn't get it out right now. Couple days ago, maybe. But I look at Kevin's family or other families, or even when my grandkids are there, it would scare me to death. Because not only, even though the road is closed, those construction trucks are not, they don't go forward. They go any which way. They back down the road. We've got the big, are they called belly dumps? I don't know what they are, the big ones, that are backing down the road, back and forth and back and forth. I mean, and I'm not saying anything because I know it's construction. I know things are gonna get a little dirty and that, but there doesn't seem to be any safety concerns about, and I know we're the only ones there, but any safety concerns at all for us or There was one car that come down the road, granted they shouldn't have, it said road closed, but heaven forbid, you know, we gotta go see what's going on. They had to close the road, they put their bulldozer, sorry, I don't know what they're called, the one with the big scraper thing in front, across the road. That's how they close the road right by the opening. We've had one car ran into it. Didn't hurt them, didn't hurt the car, but they ran into it. We had another one that went into the ditch that's right there before they got down this far because they were trying to turn around and back up. Like I said, I know these people aren't supposed to be down there. But not only is that not good for them to get an emergency vehicle, like you said, or anything else down there, it's going to be a pain. And it's a liability.
So, Dave, then, obviously, we've heard the problem. What's the city, what recommendations has the city got as far as what do we put in place so it doesn't happen again?
Okay.
We're all looking at you, Michael.
Yeah.
I don't want to steal his thunder.
No, he's steal away.
He's fixing the problem.
This is preliminary. We polled a bunch of other cities. What are they doing? What works? What doesn't work? Made some phone calls, trying to see how can we beef up our requirements so that we can remedy this. This is generally what we've seen on the type of roads and the fee per lane per block per day. And they find money talks a lot. Red tagging works pretty darn well as we found, saying, hey, you're shut down until when. This is another method or a combination of the two. This is a discussion point we haven't passed through. This is a draft. But this road would fall into $75 per lane per block per day. So every 400 feet that's closed, you'd have that per lane. If you close the road, it'd be double that, obviously, on this road. What's that?
The city gets these fines, but what about us?
The idea is,
Hopefully you don't have this problem.
What kind of a voucher program do we give the residents?
Well, and I mean,
This motivates them to get it done quicker. So
it
that what you
motivates
get is
them, but then, okay, if I get things that are flipped up in my yard or at my car, or something happens, heaven forbid, to any of my family or my kids, what's my,
your remedy for that would be against a construction company.
it would be a civil lawsuit between you and this
Civil
construction
lawsuit
company.
against the construction company. Just
But
need to go back.
but what I'm
We don't
saying
want
is,
that
where does the city or the county come in to say, hey, great, shut them down? To me, shutting them down, which I agree with to a certain point, that delays the project. So then here we go again. Then we get to start all over again. And there, I'm sorry, but we've never been, like I said, contacted by R&B, by the other construction company, anything to say, oh, we're gonna have this road closed, sorry. Can we help you with anything? It's just, oh well. This is
Well,
how you do it.
every time I've ever done construction, we've always had to go around and go notify. Exactly. So we've had to notify, and that should have happened. That's city
So
standards.
that's step one that was missed here.
Okay, well, I mean, anytime I've ever done a project, I've had to go door to door, put a note, notify that I'm gonna be working in this area at a certain time. If that didn't happen, then something's wrong there. Then a red tag should happen. Second, I don't know why we don't have in our standards, and I can't believe we don't, that we don't have a flagging issue where it's closed, open on a section of road, for flagmen. Flagmen should be involved in this anyway for safety reasons. And then third, if you've got these prices on there, yeah, any contractor's gonna work, as hard as he can, so it doesn't affect you. If it happens to your property, then yeah, the contractor is responsible to fix whatever is on your property and should be noted,
And see, David was told that we don't want your wife taking pictures anymore. We don't want any problems.
Good luck.
Maybe we put that in the ordinance. That's part of
I
it.
mean, what else am I
Best
doing?
thing.
Well, I can
I just thought I don't have kids.
I know that I've always been notified by city
not in a
officials to
public
fix the
hearing.
problem, and I've had to get the problem
And
fixed.
like I said, Dave has been good, and he's told them, okay, you should have this and this and this. So when the last time Dave came out, they were supposed to have, and according to their company, they were supposed to have a water truck. They were supposed to have a sweeper truck. Well, unfortunately, both sweeper trucks that they have are broke down. and they were supposed to come Monday, Wednesday, well, whenever dust is, okay? The water truck that they did have actually puts out more dust than whatever. And Dave said they were supposed to come at certain days, not seen it once since he come out from them. And like I said, the one day they did come, the day before you came out, they did come because I took pictures, and then they come and but since then, we've had nothing.
Is it county road?
Is this road a county road or a city road?
Now it's a city road.
Okay.
Okay,
Very
well, then
recent
Gives us-
that's
acquisition,
our
but
responsibility to follow our
Absolutely.
construction standards.
I think we recognize that, and I hope nobody takes anything that we're saying tonight. I mean, we're not trying to defend a developer. Frankly, I mean, I think we're readily admitting that there are things that we should have done differently, things we certainly need to do differently moving forward. And, you know, part of the reality that I appreciate you guys recognizing is that development does impact people. It truly does, but we're in the business of trying to mitigate that as best as we can.
And I don't want you guys to feel like I'm attacking you or Dave but
Well,
I would like you to come and look at the situation and live in it and see how it would be for you and your family.
I just
And-
like to say one thing, and I'm more like to get my eyes for another mayor or Wayne and Lynn and myself went down there yesterday because they're digging into the culverts that run underneath the road over the farmers on the other side. We haven't been contacted. So we went down and looked over. But when you're there, you can kind of see why this thing is dragging. They've got to dig that mud out and put it in a truck and haul it off. Them other semis have got to bring down the gravel to backfill that. So it's all going to be backed in from one side. So one truck's got to come out, the gravel's got to come in while that truck's out dumping. It's got to come back and get 2 or 3 scoops of mud and take it out, and the next truck's coming. They're in a mess right there, and they've got to go, they're right up against a 36-inch culvert of ours that goes underneath the road. And they're down so deep that evidently they've pushed underneath it today. They've got it past that. But anyway, I don't agree that that road ought to be swept and washed from her home back up, so she's got a decent road. But there's no way they can do this job. There's a sewer line in that road, and they're sitting there dead center where they haven't got hardly walking room on the other side of the road, so there's no way you've got traffic there. So
It's a challenging I'm not in the business, but I've heard from people that I trust and believe that it's a challenging project. Yet, I've been down there a handful of times where nobody's working. And I think that's what we can
That's
control. I
frustration.
appreciated what Commissioner Mitchell said. And this is really, we can't force people to do things. We can try to provide them a reason to do things. We can try to motivate. And that's what we're trying to do. And I honestly don't think there's much more that we can do.
So I
So
have a
can we,
question.
If there's property damage though, you can make that a condition on
Absolutely.
inspection.
Can we
Fence
limit-
being replaced
Yeah,
or,
right.
yep.
Exactly.
can we limit how much they do at a time?
I think you absolutely could.
You can set working hours
Yeah.
on public roads.
Working
Not
hours
just
is
working
probably saying
hours,
you can only
but-
impact this
Exactly.
piece of road.
Once you've got pipe laid from here to
Yep.
here, and it's been checked out, it looks good, you filled it back in,
Part of
then you
the
can
ch-
start on the next part.
Part of the challenge with this is whatever part of that stretch you're impacting it.
Chris,
But in other cases, that would be.
Chris, I
very
think one of the problems that they're probably facing is the soil itself that they're digging in. It almost sounds like that's quicksand.
Oh, I'm sure. Like I
And,
said, the
and,
water takes
and
high
they
out.
did the same thing on 1,000 North. It's the same type of soil that they were digging in there. And it's a terrible, soil to dig in because it collapses. I mean, it will collapse and it will collapse all that area. And so I'm sure they're fighting it like crazy. And so you almost have to have your soil ready to put in and put it back in as you take it out because it just disintegrates. It's the weirdest stuff I've ever dealt with in my life.
No, and I understand. I'm not saying, that, but what I have a question for is, okay, and I don't know construction at all, but this is coming down the road. So when we first started this Annie's project, okay, they've got to widen the road. We were told they have to widen the road. So if they have to widen that road, and if these pipes have to, are in their project, or they have to be there, then in my mind, why are they having to do down the middle of the road instead of down on their property that doesn't shut everything? I know they have to cross, so that's fine. Am I making sense? Why don't they have to go down on their property line instead of a city or county road, whoever, depending on who you talk to, has that?
Usually depends on what the infrastructure is. Usually you'll put your sewer on one side and your water on the other side, and I don't know what they're dealing with right now.
Yeah, the sewer goes straight down the middle of the road.
So that's what they're dealing with.
Okay.
And
See,
so that's on any city road or anything else.
Okay.
That's,
The sewer has been in there for quite a few years now, but they're putting this other line in, and this is a big drain. It's a 36-inch
Yeah, it's a water drain.
concrete pipe that's going to drain the river.
storm drain.
They keep moving up.
It's in the city's master plan.
Yeah.
And I
Okay,
think
that's great.
They're gonna take it all up to where that little road goes across by Miley and Hale, but they should have enough room that they can at least have their road open enough that she can get in and out without trouble where she's got.
You might look on the master plan there, and it will show the infrastructure lines on what they're putting in, whether it's storm drains, whether it's water, or whether it's sewer. And it will show where that's supposed to go. And sometimes, Fred, you know, you'll have to close the road for a certain amount of time, and so, but that's where the contractor will come to you and give you a week notice saying, hey, we'll, at this certain part of time, we will be doing this work, you know, and you know, and we'll be doing that construction at that point. You know, and I don't know what's, you know, it would be good to go talk to Bert or somebody like that to see what, you know, how they've got that.
We can't get him to answer phone calls.
Okay, well, anyway.
I know, it's not, like I said.
And I'm just guessing on that too,
But
so.
what concerns me also, okay, so this is right in front, it's starting to come down my road, what's gonna happen when it's right in front of my house?
Hey,
If they have to bring it, I don't know if they
I
have
got a
to bring it.
garage and some sleeping bags if you want to.
I got a garage and sleeping bags too, and a trailer that I won't be able to go anywhere. But, I mean, I know you guys wouldn't wanna live with this,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and this group and this meeting isn't probably to solve this issue. What I do appreciate is the fact that the spirit of this issue could manifest itself all through the river bottoms. And Dave, I think that's where you was trying to allude to this, is the city's going to have to learn as these things are going on that we got potential. But I do think the city needs to take care of their citizens in this capacity. There's been enough discussion here that she needs somebody to go to and listen, and these legal things need to be, they need some support. But I don't think this is the group to do that. But we can understand the bigger picture of what happens, you know, and maybe to prepare for. But Dave, I'll just challenge you to, I'm sure the city's involved, but this sounds like something that's got to be taken care of. And communications have got to be improved, and maybe some emphasis on manpower or whatever it's going to take. But I don't.
Is this something that goes in title changes, or is this something more of the city engineering department deals with and they take care of?
Actually, our city attorney's working on that.
This is going to be an ordinance.
Perhaps part of the construction standards or something
It
like
wouldn't come
that.
through this group though, right? Or would
If
it?
it's an ordinance, it depends on what
We'll have to go through
I
this.
see.
specifically we change. Yeah.
Okay.
Ultimately, the final decision will be on city council.
Well, this is good for us to hear, really, real case examples.
I do say, I appreciate Dave and for what he's trying to help us, he's been very good.
And I'm certainly not the only one that, you know, from the city's
I don't know who
perspective
else
that's
He's been out there, but I do know Dave has.
trying to do things.
Sorry what you're going through, and it sounds like it's going to be a challenge for a while.
One more thing real quick on this, just so you know. So I spoke with Bert this morning about it. The sewer, or the storm drain, and Wilson that's out there, he said the storm drain should be done next week, meaning done back up into the subdivision. At that point, they will have room to work on just the water and PI, pressure irrigation, and that will be hopefully far enough. It'll be on the north side of the north side of the storm drain pipe, and then it will stay on the outside. So our ability to get more of the road open And then we'll be better. And then our ability to focus on them making a path, waters, you know, protected everything down South Lane, or sorry, excuse me, down Bradford over to your house will be a little bit easier once they get that storm drain into the subdivision, because then that middle of the road will then be able to be open, and then they'll just be off on the shoulder on the east and north side. That makes sense?
Yeah.
How will they leave that? Will it be a cold patch, or they just put?
They have to asphalt it.
They'll have to asphalt it.
Yeah. It'll be a cold, yeah, it'll be a cold patch.
After this, before they're complete, after they're done with the storm sewer and are working on the PI and culinary, will it just be, it won't be open though? Will they asphalt it then?
We're gonna work with them to try and asphalt what they can. Obviously, we don't wanna have it be out right on the edge of a trench and it falls off or whatnot, but because we wanna be able to plow it, and you can't plow a gravel or dirt road. So obviously time's ticking with, you never know when the snow's coming, but try and asphalt as much as we can, and so then it can be open, whether it's flagged or whatever it is. And at bare minimum, even if we have to close South Lane for longer, that backside to your house along the front of the subdivision will be probably the easiest to work and leave open, have that stay as an access. But yeah, you're gonna be out here today, right? Yep. And they're out there, and we watch them out there. You're gonna be here tomorrow, yep. And then they're not. And you're like, and when's the road gonna be open? It's gonna be open Thursday, and you go out there Thursday, it's not, and no one's there. Why is it not open? Hey, we'll be out there tomorrow. And we've had lots of conversations, but
Well, darn it. That's my everyday.
Okay, Mr. Anderson.
Again, thanks. We have not made any changes from what I talked about a month ago. And honestly, I don't know that I'd suggest that we consider making changes. Like I've said, the document that we present again for you guys to consider tonight, it's an advisory document. And for me, it all boils down to helping the city collectively understand. And really, it reaffirmed what I think we all would have guessed, which is that there are folks that don't want to see the river bottoms change at all. And there are folks that at some point in time, maybe it's now, maybe it's later, would like to see the river bottoms change in different ways. And trying to balance those two issues in some kind of way that really works and doesn't just work in 2020 or 2021, but hopefully works over decades. We're not there yet, but this document, I think, does prescribe some potential ways to create that balance that gives us the best shot. And that's what we're wanting to dive into entirely, to see really what we can do. Many of the things that we talked about when we got together a few weeks ago, we'd already understood very, very well, I think, relative to what I think the most involved stakeholders would like to see. Most involved stakeholders being people that own property in the river bottoms. And moving forward, the focus really turns to them and what is going to work with them. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the transferable development right kind of a concept. If you guys want to discuss that in any more detail, and I might suggest, for example, that we look at a video or something like that, that probably people would enjoy more than hearing me talk about it again. But the involvement of property owners is the most critical piece of seeing if that's a concept that really can work or not. To that end, I appreciate Mr. Swenson helping us develop, maybe a list of who those key stakeholders are. We know from the county records who owns property in the river bottoms. We also know that a significant number of people that own property in the river bottoms, whether it's 20 acres or 2 or 4, don't really have anything invested in the community. They're absentee property owners or something like that. And we're really trying to get to where we know exactly who we can't leave out. That's the best way for me to put it. We don't want to miss anybody. And I'll continue to ask you guys for help to make sure that we're not missing anybody. You know who we need to be involving. And as we move forward again, really focusing on that TDR concept, these are the folks that become very, very important to involve. But like I said, nothing's changed. I'm happy to do whatever you want to do, answer any questions, describe anything. I also don't want to take more time than you want to take.
Okay. The way I see this vision plan of us either recommending that this council approve it, the way I see this in the biggest picture is that we are agreeing to a big vision of what that property can be used for. I think the thing we don't know, this group, and won't know for some time, is this transfer of development rights, the TDRs. And I personally don't feel like that's part of this discussion. I think the bigger discussion is how do we feel about this vision of restoring, not restoring, but maintaining certain areas of the river bottoms to be never developed, and some of it to be developed. And by restricting people's development, there's going to be a tool in place to make them property owners as whole as they can be because of that restriction. And that's going to be done through the TDRs and whatever method that is. So I'd like to just state that so that maybe we don't go down that road per se and beat it up. We beat it up quite a bit, and yet I think the city, Dave, you didn't mention this, but I attended a meeting last week where I think the city's hired or is about to hire a company that's going to come in and spend months in coming up with this TDR and this concept. That we don't know what it looks like today, but we're going to know, and the city's going to know much more later. But again, it's not part of the vision. The part of the vision is to look at the whole river bottoms and say, this is going to be saved, this is not, this is going to be developed. So I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel about that, but rather than get down in the weeds, it's really the bigger picture of us coming up with a roadmap that we haven't had and that will help us meet with future developers, meet future transitions with a more uniform roadmap that we don't have today. And there's been a couple of years of study on this. I think it's got beat up pretty good. Does any of the commissioners feel in unison with that, or?
So Dave, did we hire somebody to do the TDRs?
We have.
So that's, how long did they say they would take on that?
We would love to have a draft. So just talking about the idea of exploring the TDR concept to see if that can be feasible. We would love to have a draft by the end of January.
Did you guys know that we did that? Did you hear anything on that, on TDRs?
We didn't know you hired
Okay.
somebody.
Well, what we did, we
In the
met,
process.
we met with the city council and we talked over the vision and stuff like that, and decided that it might be best if we hire somebody to consult with us on these TDRs to give us a better idea on how they work and the best way to use them. So we've got a little bit better idea of what to do with them, through the whole area. So that's what we're waiting for right now, is for this consultant to get back with us. So we've got a little bit more education, so we can educate you too on how them work. And then that way, I think it will help us open this up a little bit more on where we can develop and where we shouldn't develop, and what, more open spaces or less open spaces. And so everybody down in the river bottom benefits from it. So nobody's getting 30,000 and the other one's getting 200,000. Everybody will benefit somehow, on how your ground is. Because, we almost feel like it's not fair for one person to be in the floodplain and not benefit the same as somebody else. But again, that's just the way your ground is sometimes, and and how it's developed, and we can't help that sometimes. But if we got a tool maybe to work with, maybe, I'm saying maybe, to work with. It would help us a little bit better on our decisions and stuff like that.
So I think the question I have, so you've got the consultant company hired.
Let's,
So then,
probably ought to have you come up and talk so that everybody can hear.
Chris, do you need a drink of water? You've been talking a lot.
I know, I've got a big mouth.
Yeah, I'm going to formally go into public hearing. Yep.
I think
Thanks,
the
Dave.
question I have, and I don't know if they do too, is I don't understand what a TDR is, what any developmental trade, whatever they are.
And see,
So-
that's the thing, is a lot of us don't either. I mean, we
Okay.
do a little bit,
Yeah,
but
I
with
mean-
these consultants and that will help us understand a lot more of what we can use this tool for.
So they'll come in and consult with the city, but then are we going to get, as stakeholders or landowners, are we going to get educated on what those are, like as a group, and how it will affect what is out there now?
Absolutely.
Okay,
That's
that's
the
kind of
idea
the
of
question I
the whole
have.
thing.
Okay, that's
We
what
don't
I
have
didn't
enough
know.
information to give you that,
Yeah. and
that
I-
clear-cut vision now.
Okay,
And so that's the idea of what the city has been trying to do, is to get someone who can help us with that and present a clear vision.
okay.
See, we sat there for, a couple hours, and just like you said, one said, well, let's just punt and forget it, and then let's do this and let's do that.
Yeah.
Finally, we just decided we needed another tool to help us work with this, and so we decided to go ahead, spend the money, get us better educated so we can better educate you guys, and then we can all make a decision and make that, and go with that.
And that I appreciate, and I'm sure they do too. Another question I have, and I don't know how these, like I said, I don't know how these things, I'm learning. Meeting after meeting, I'm learning lots of things. But we are county out there. So what I am having kind of a misunderstanding about, I assume, is how you, as a city planning commission, can decide on what county is doing. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
So that's where I'm kind of like, well, how can you say, okay, this is the vision? I know we're in Spanish Fork, city limits, but as far as that goes, we're county. We don't exist to the city. Does that make sense?
It does, but Chris, so the way it works is landowners like you are going to come to the city eventually and say, we want to be annexed into the city and have all the city benefits and the city infrastructure. And then we have to have a plan of how to deal with that as different ones come in. So Spanish Fork's been annexing county for years and years and years. That's how cities expand.
Yeah.
So the river bottoms is all part of Spanish Fork's boundary policy,
Okay.
meaning that in the future, we have the vision that that all will be part of Spanish Fork. So rather than wait until it's all developed through county and ends up turning out to be something that Spanish Fork doesn't want, the city's trying to be proactive, come up with a plan and say, although it's not Spanish Fork City yet, we assume that within the next 100 years, most of, if not all, will be part of Spanish Fork City. And so this is what we would like it to look like in the future as it comes into the city.
And you've seen that happen today with two areas.
Yeah,
And and so they came into us and they says, this was our general plan, and we would like to amend that, or we would like to change the zoning.
Yeah, and that I understand. That's why I just had an
And so
issue.
what we're trying to do is envision the whole river bottoms and basically do the same thing and say, okay, maybe this area will be like a 5-acre area, especially like around the floodplains. Maybe up there by Main Street, you might have a little higher density, so it might be an R16 or an R112 or, but anyway, that's what we're thinking. But then again, with these TDRs, that we could transfer them and move them things around like that to help other landowners. So you all get together and form it together. But again, this is the reason why we want to do this is so when, just like Mr. Argyle says, when you guys come in and want to develop, then you know what you can do. The developers know what they can do and what they can't do.
Well, and like tonight, I'm looking at what you did tonight up River Cove, all those, things can change, right? So this plan, even though it's put in place, things can change. And like Kevin said, it's up to the landowner, pretty much.
Things can change unless a based on TDRs,
Yeah.
those development rights are extinguished, then you're setting in stone what's gonna
That's right.
happen with that piece of property
That's right.
going
Okay.
forward. It won't change at that point.
Okay.
Chris, I liked the resident earlier today, Mr. Olson, that explained his mother's situation was, this is her 401K plan.
That's my dad's. This was his
So-
legacy to his kids. You know,
Sure.
this is what our inheritance is.
Sure,
So-
and that's how you have to look at it, is everyone in this room that's a property owner, at some point, it might be their 401K plan is, I'm going to sell eventually, that's how I'm gonna retire, or I'm gonna pass on to my children, but it's in the county, and eventually, odds are, it'll end up in the city.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's kind of hard for us, is because some are put in this area, some are put in this area, you know, and so I think we're kind of locked in and we have no choice. And I think that's kind of what some of the problem is too. So, okay, thank you.
Say my name.
Yes.
Okay, Lynn Swenson, property owner in the River Bottoms. I'm gonna make this quick. Brad, I have to respectfully disagree that this don't have anything to do with TDR's division. It has things to do with TDR because it still deals with money. So I think the TDRs does have an effect.
I only meant that because we don't know what the TDRs will.
Correct,
It
we
might not
don't.
even be the proper tool.
It might not.
But it's not, I don't feel like the TDRs is part of the vision itself. The vision is, do we want to populate the entire river bottoms with mass development?
I understand what
And I think
you're
this
saying
vision
now.
says no. And so that's what I'm saying. is
Okay.
They're two different kind of issues. We don't know the answers for the exchange.
Correct.
Does that make
Okay,
sense?
It does. It
Okay.
does. Appreciate that.
Yep.
You know, we talk about the floodplain. A little while ago, they're building right on the river. Things can happen, and things can do now, piping, elevation things. I can build right next to the river as long as I'm above the floodplain. I had to figure that out when I built down there. So I think the ground just next to the river is as valuable as that's out of the floodplain. Put yourselves in my shoes, okay? I work really hard. Yesterday I left at 6 o'clock in the morning, got home at 1 o'clock last night. I don't think there's anybody who works many more hours than I do. Don't get paid a lot. I gamble a whole lot. Spent $70,000 yesterday, and I hope I get the money back on these cattle. So this might be my 401, and I appreciate Johnny's comment for his mother. Maybe this will be my mother's 401. My mother's still alive at age 91. So she might need to sell this for her 401. If that happens, so be it. And it scares me that this vision might put a damper on that. Maybe not, I don't know, till we know all the tools and everything to go with it. I want to be able to decide what happens to our property. I have a hard time Spanish Fork City or their citizens saying, this is what will happen to your property. You have no say. I struggle with that. I would like to decide that for our and what's best at this point for my mother and for our family, for our legacy, for our 401, for everything like that. So with that, I think this TDR thing is going to be huge. Maybe that's going to be the greatest tool ever. And you know what? I would love to see it green space forever. Nobody other than Fred loves this river bottom maybe as much as I do. But things do change, so keep us in mind, and thank you for your time.
Hey, Lynn, stay right here. So you want to know what your mother told me?
It'll never happen.
Okay, then I won't say it then.
You know where my dad would be today?
Yes, sir.
Those that knew him.
Okay.
Things change.
I know.
They do.
And I'm not saying this vision is a bad thing. Don't think that. But just keep us stakeholders in mind. Make us whole. Make us whole.
Yeah.
And I think our meeting with Dave a few weeks ago, I think that went, to me, that went a long ways, Dave. and I appreciate
I
that.
appreciate it, really.
So when you looked at the vision and the different scenarios that you've seen in there, Lynn, which one did you like, sort of, in a way?
I can't even, when you put me on the spot last time, I don't know. I don't know the answers to that because I don't feel like we have, as a stakeholder, all the tools we need to make that decision.
Well, if you had the opportunity to bring your land and annex it into the city, and you had a developer come in and say, hey, I want this all R112, and I can develop along this river just like they said they can, and bring it up and make it legalized, and you're gonna get the big bucks for that, or do you?
I might move to Idaho and keep my father's legacy in another location rather than the river bottoms. And at that point, Richard, that's maybe what will happen. I will move my operation. The river bottoms, some of them.
So see, so that sort of wipes out the vision of what, we're sort of looking at, and the next thing you know.
Do we need this vision today?
Well,
I'd like to know how much money.
My deal is, I just say we keep it in the county for a while, but again, like we're talking about, and we've talked about and kicked this around, and Brad says we don't want to kick this around all the time, but we got to have sort of a general plan area, because sooner or later it's going to get developed, and the developers are going to come in, and the developers are going to look at this and see what they can do or what they can't do. And that's what we're trying to look at right now, whether it's your ground or Fred's ground.
Anybody else's.
Or Chris's ground or anybody's ground. Bottom line is you want the best for your buck. And so we're trying to find the best solutions that's going to try to help everybody, but that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. I would have liked to got $200,000 for my ground in Palmyra, but there's no way. The development's not there, and I was ready to get my 401 right now. So I was willing to sell it for what I sold it for and move on. And one of these days you might feel the same way, or else you're going to say, hey, I'm going to hold off. But we just want to plan that when that finally comes to your mother's ground and your ground, probably your ground, it will probably be your ground because your mother's 90-something years old. The developers have got to have an idea what they're going to be dealing with. And that's what we're trying to get, is that vision on what our general plan is going to be for the whole river bottoms. And hey, that's we're trying to make it just, but it's
This is not going to please everybody.
No, it's not.
And sometimes I wonder, and I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm on TV and I'm going to know it. Sometimes I feel like, well, let's just, in the river bottoms, the owners, there's only a handful. The citizens, there's 40,000 Spanish Fork citizens. So if we upset 20 landowners against 40,000.
Still your ground. Still your ground.
Is it?
But it was East Bench's ground at one time. It was developers, or people's ground up
Farmers'
there.
land.
And you've seen what happened there. And I think the East Bench looks good, and I think it was developed
Change is
right.
going to happen.
Yeah.
We can't change.
I mean, we're at a point, to me, that the vision that's been there is just agriculture, all of it. And we got to narrow it down for the changing times. This puts another layer of detail to it, much like these projects we've been talking about tonight up by Johnny's place. 10 years ago, that wasn't even earmarked for mixed use. And yet, they had the foresight 10 years ago to say, that's going to be a major interchange. Let's put it mixed use. And I don't see this, River Bottoms, if this is accepted, it gives us a tighter idea of what's going to happen. I hope that it doesn't mean we can't change things. In 5 years, we don't, the council, the planning commission say, you know what? That might have sounded like a great idea then, but it's not what we want now. And I don't think there's anything that says in this vision that it can't change. Is that correct, Dave?
There's nothing we could do to prevent a future city council from making changes. I will say, we hope to get it right enough now
that we're close.
People don't feel
Maybe making tweaks or something.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm certain that if in my mind, things play out best case scenario, there will still be adjustments made over time simply because there are things that we can't predict now that will make sense in the future. So,
You know, we've looked at this vision a little bit, and we've looked at MAG putting a road through there eventually, maybe. It's, you know, it's not right now, it's not set in stone, it's not set in anything, it's just there. Just like we've seen here on all of our other developments, when that road comes in, things will change just a little bit along that road, because we might want a couple of little commercial areas through there where people can go there and buy groceries or something without having to go up there. That might change a little bit, just like we're saying. But in the meantime, we're just trying to get it close enough so if a developer does finally come in, if Chris says, you know what, I'm tired of this, I want mine developed, what can I put there? And if it's zoned for 5 acres, then that's what you're gonna get. And a developer's gonna pay you for that. And if you say no, by that area, I think we ought to continue that on from what Annie's is and go with that, and then maybe that's what we need to look at. And
Well, and I appreciate Dave and Brad saying that things could change. We could tweak things if we see that things are not
we change it all the
planned
time.
correctly.
We change zones all the time, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, Fred, for 30 years, I tried to get you on the phone, and you wouldn't have a cell phone, and tonight, your cell phone rang in our meeting.
Not this daughter.
And you know, when the cell phone goes off in a meeting, you owe donuts to the next one. And I've been seeing you at every meeting for the last 2 months, so next month, bring the donuts.
You're right.
I'm Jackie Vincent Smith, in case you don't know, Fred's daughter. Once again, I try not to cry when I get up here. I'm going to respectfully ask you to not recommend this to the city council yet. Reason being, every single one of you has said you don't understand how that TDR is going to work. If you've hired someone, we've made a step forward, let's understand how it's going to work before we take it a step further. I'd like to point out Dave, if I've misunderstood, please correct me. But I've read the vision. My understanding is, I think when I add up the numbers, less than 1,000 people in a city of 40,000 filled out your survey, made comments at the open house. That's not a very big percentage. No one has shown up at your planning meetings and said, I am all for what we're doing in the river bottoms. But the landowners, I'm not going to call them shareholders because they're landowners, have shown up and said, let's figure out what this is going to do to us before we go further. So, and then one other question I have, or something that my dad has told me my whole life, you know, he's like, if something ever happens to me and you have to figure out what to do with my ground, don't ever, ever sell my water or get rid of my rights. The rights should stick with my ground. So I'm going to need to understand how that TDR works and explain that to my brothers and sisters, because for my years helping him, I've been told, don't let him go. Don't hold on to a piece of ground that doesn't have any value and any rights. I know for our recreational property, my husband said, we want property that has these rights. We don't want property that the rights have been stripped away. I don't know if I'm pretty sure you have some farming experience. I think most of you have experience with these things. So that's something that I would say, until we know what a TDR does for sure and what the rules are going to be, I don't know that we need to take it to the city council yet. So, and then my other question would be, and I think we've kind of addressed this, because down the road, any city council can go through and change it. If it's in a TDR, my understanding is you can't go back and change it. And if you put it in a conservation trust, you can't go back and change it. But I want to make sure that the city is subject to the exact same rules that someone else in the floodplain is. If the city owns ground in the floodplain And the landowners in the floodplain have been told it can only be used and sold to someone else in agriculture. I want to know, is city ground in that floodplain only going to be good to be sold for agriculture? So those would be my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Wayne, you got anything to say? Okay. Make sure you got a chance.
The only thing I would say is we need to be informed whenever you can see that there's some construction going on that's going to interfere with the irrigation companies. We've run into this out here. Yesterday we was meeting out there with Randall's crew and that. But it happens all too often, and I don't know. I know there's laws on the books that you cannot bother an irrigation ditch or these right-of-ways for this water. And now I understand it. I took a day off here. My kids took me to Idaho to look at a farm, because that's what I kind of love. And then when we get back, I understand that you've had a little meeting somewhere, and they're trying to, the developers are trying to get it to where if they call me, I'm a president of an irrigation company, and if I haven't got them an answer within so many days, they have the right to doze that ditch in, and that isn't. I won't even say it here. But that is so far out of line, and even if it's a company ditch or a private ditch, if it's a company ditch, I will not make that decision without the other board members. There's 5 of us on that board, and on a private ditch, I would meet with that individual, and everybody that waters below him has got to sign off that they're agreeable. Until this legislature do some of the things that they're trying to pass to help this development is bullshit. There's no other way of looking at it. So, I've said my opinions.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Public hearing. Okay, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners?
Just one of the thoughts I've been having is that we got to keep in mind that the city didn't just decide that let's look forward just by chance. They've had multiple developers that have already approached them with different pieces of the river bottom. So we're being nudged by developers and landowners in different parts of the river bottoms already. And it seems like we kind of forgot that in the conversation. We've had a piece down there by Tree Line Road. We've had a piece down the south end of the river bottoms on Main Street. Annie's Acres was right there by the edge, and I think these are the things that are kind of prompting the city. Am I correct, Dave?
That was the impetus for the study, exactly.
Okay, so we just got to keep that in mind, that this just isn't for fun. It's already, we have people in the county who are already wanting to annex into the city, and pieces of it are in the river bottom. So just got to keep that in mind as part of our decision process.
Yeah, this is really nothing more than a general plan. Couldn't it be described as a general plan?
That in fact is what's proposed.
Yeah, that's what it
This
is.
would be adopted as part of
That general plan in the city changes all the time. It's a blueprint. It's a roadmap.
So, general plan, when you bring up the general plan and look at it on a map, you've got designated colors. So with us having 3 options in this draft plan, the vision plan, are we at this point supposed to approve or designate one of those, and that's what the mapping then for the general plan would look like?
What I'm recommending, and this could be handled in a lot of different ways, and honestly, I don't think it matters a lot. In fact, I think this process that we're in the middle of right now, this discussion, I'm wondering how much that really matters. I think there's value in it, and I think there's value in it considering some perspectives that probably don't impact these folks at all. But we have the land use element of the general plan, and we have the land use map of the general plan. So general plan, for what we talk about most of the time, has 2 pieces. There's a bunch of words, there's the narrative that describes different things about the future land uses in the city, and then we have the map. usually we're focused on the map, right? So there's that. Now, we also have other parts of the general plan. We have things that deal with utilities that are different elements of the general plan. We have things that deal with parks that are elements of the general plan. We'll talk in a minute about an element of the general plan that talks about providing housing for lower income people in the community. The recommendation is that this document would be adopted en masse as something that would be a part of the general plan, but yet distinct from the land use element. So if indeed, for example, somebody wanted to annex property and have it zoned in the river bottoms, and we considered a general plan amendment at that point in time, we might confer with this document to see what might make sense as we change potentially the land use map of the general plan. Just another advisory document, and in that respect, not necessarily a lot of teeth. It's not law. But at the same time, it's recognized by the city. And for example, if a developer came in tomorrow wanting to talk about a new development concept for the river bottoms that we haven't seen yet, where it becomes valuable for me to have it adopted, is then I can pull it off the shelf, show it to him, and say that this is somewhat recognized by the city as an advisory document. And if you're not proposing something that's somewhat consistent with this, you're probably pushing rope uphill and that type of thing. Or if folks maybe, and now I'm just maybe throwing out some hypotheticals here to try to illustrate why I think there is value in the city recognizing the document in its current form. You know, maybe if we do get to the point in the near future where there is some development in the river bottoms, it may be by way of having TDRs in play, and maybe even before that. Maybe if the concept of talking about having development happen in the river bottoms, as we're talking about a TDR program, it ruffles the feathers of some folks maybe that have properties that overlook the river bottoms. We can pull out this document and say, well, guess what? This is why we're having even those conversations and that type of a thing. So potentially, it could have some influence from a lot of different perspectives. Honestly, I think we have some marching orders as staff now. We will be reaching out to folks soon, probably not next week, but I think within the next month to start to talk in more detail about that concept. So whether it does get adopted or not, I don't think it matters tremendously, given what next step we plan on taking. But I think there is some value in buttoning it up and moving on, and that's partly why I think it'd be great to get it adopted and, like I said, move on.
One thing that I've heard quite a bit when we've discussed the river bottoms, everybody seems to have the same opinion or mindset that over time things are going to change. I don't know how many years or how long it'll take, but that things are going to change. But one thing that I really like about the vision plan is the fact that there is an option in there that the way the river bottoms looks today doesn't necessarily need to change. If we do it right, if it gets figured out right, where we have that option that the development rights are extinguished once those are sold off, what we see today could possibly be there for a very, very long time. And I like that. And in my mind, that's a win-win, not only for the 40,000 residents that like to walk in your backyard and smell the roses, but also a win for you guys when you're ready at that point to cash in and maybe possibly get a little bit more money through TDRs than you would through selling it as county property. I don't know. That's still something we're looking at. Let's hope that that's how it turns out. But I think it could be a win-win for everybody.
So my understanding, Dave, is if we go with that scenario where where it stays the way it is currently, but let's say through this TDR study, they come back with a value that no one's excited about. Nothing's really changed, right? Nothing's going forward as law. It's just a recommendation.
Exactly, and I've really appreciated, maybe to speak again to the stakeholders that are here, first of all, your patience, And the fact that even just tonight, I've heard that you guys understand that there are a lot of questions that we still can't answer. And I think we've tried to be as candid as we can about that, and I like the way that Richard explained where we're at. Really, the next step is a feasibility step, and it's to see if there is a path forward that might make any one of you, and hopefully as many of you as stakeholders as possible, feel like there's a reason, there's some motivation for you to consider maybe selling development rights to somebody else, maybe putting a conservation easement on your property. If a couple of months from now, it's clear that we can't get there, I think that's when we stop. But the step that we're taking now is all about trying to understand if it's possible, given your expectations, and frankly, the expectations of the folks on the other end of that equation that has to work, people that would maybe buy development rights. If there's a way to make that marriage happen, that's what we want to find out. We want to find out what it would take for that to happen, and all the while, of course, is that possible? That's a significant part of the conversation. I'm optimistic because of successes that have happened elsewhere, but yet this is the most just complicated land use regulation concept that I've been involved with in a while, and so I recognize that potentially is challenging, potentially maybe a little bit intimidating. In some ways, you start to think about all the different things that could go wrong, but hey, it's a Spanish Fork. If people can do it someplace else, right? We can do something here to make it work, and I think we want to give it our best shot too. So as staff, we're going into this optimistically.
So last Saturday, I got up before daylight and went out and tried to find a pheasant. And in the south end of the county, it's pretty hard to find a place where I can go find a pheasant anymore. We ended up on state property down in Benjamin, down by West Mountain. And as we were walking along and thinking that we might find a pheasant somewhere, you have a tendency to want to walk where it's easy. But eventually, if you want to find a pheasant, you've got to get in the weeds. And we're kind of staying out of the weeds right now because we don't know where the pheasant is. But if you want the pheasant, we're going to have to jump into the weeds sometime. And right now, we don't have the information. We can't tell you where that is. We don't have a good dog that'll hunt. So that's what we're trying to do now, is to find that. But I can guarantee you that as a landowner, nobody can force you to ever sell your ground or to tell you how you're going to run it. They might be able to tell you what you can do if you do sell it. But if you want to keep farming it, I don't know of a way that anybody can take it from you. The question is, well,
a road through you?
Well, that may happen. That may happen. And when it does, you're going to have to deal with that. But, those things are few and far between. And we had an example tonight of someone that decided that they want to cash in a little now. And there's some farmers that converted some crappy ground down by that slough down in Benjamin, sold that property to the state, and now that's designated as a wildlife habitat. And I went down, we happened to get in the weeds once and got one pheasant. One. So, as we go through this whole exercise, there isn't one patch of weeds that you're going to find 1 million pheasants anymore. That isn't going to happen. What's going to happen is that we're all going to have to find our own way. And I have a lot of sympathy for the guys. I think it was said best when you said, that there's only 1,000 people that responded to the survey, and none of those that were in favor, well, I won't say that. The vast majority of those were in favor of leaving the river bottoms as they are. Very few of them are landowners. But by the same token, if you guys want to preserve the river bottoms as is, don't sell. Simple as that. Don't sell. On the other hand, when the time comes that 401k needs to be dispensed a little bit, I had a similar situation as Richard, that I decided that I would go ahead and sell the little bit of ground I had in Palmyra, because it made sense for me at that time. Each one of you guys will make that decision. And when you do, you'd like to have the $200,000 an acre. But you can't guarantee that that's ever going to happen. It's not available to me in Palmyra right now. And I still made a pretty good little piece of change on that ground. May not have been what I could get if I was on the edge of development somewhere. But this is, you know, if we don't start with some kind of a vision of how we want things to look, then we're just kicking around. We don't really know what direction we need to go. The TDRs are a tool, just like it's a tool to develop if you're right next to the ground that's already annexed. And if you're out in the Tules where nobody else is, you're probably not going to have a developer that's going to give you a lot of money. And that developer is looking to buy at the lowest price he can so that he can make the most money at the end of the day. Had a couple here tonight. So, you know, staying out of the weeds is where we've got to stay, because we don't even know where to go right now. But at the same time, what do we do if we don't do anything? We just stay stuck in the mud and we wait for somebody else to come and propose an annexation and a development. If we don't have a vision, if we don't have a plan. So I lean towards, you know, having some kind of a vision, some kind of a plan. I'd be a fool to say it'll never change, or that what's decided would be that way forever. But if you got a few minutes over the next few days, go over in the Springville River bottoms. Go take a look at what Hobble Creek's turned into. You know, the only place that it's open is around the Bartholomew Pond. It's all the same kind of ground as what we've got. So, you know, as we make the decisions, I think it's a very healthy thing to have these meetings, and I'm tickled to death that you guys are a part of that now, and that we've taken some steps to make sure that you guys stay informed and stay involved in your ground. I don't think anybody in this room wants to be a burden on anybody. And, you know, all of these things we talk about is an effort to try to make everyone whole to some degree, and at the same time respect your land rights as owners. So that's all I've got to say.
So we've had in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised if we, at some point in the future, have planning commissioners and city council members who have a totally different view as far as density as what we have. You'll get people that move from California that think 20 acres to the unit, or 20 units to the acre, is low density. You know what? And so if we have an opportunity now where we can look at the river bottoms and say, hey, we don't want high density there, we want to conserve it, we want to keep it the way it is, and we have a way to set that in stone, you know, in some kind of way, hopefully, to where future developers or future commissioners, future city council members who are pro high development and high density, you know, they may look at the river bottoms and think that'd be a great place for a whole bunch of homes. And, you know, you don't know what the future brings. And so if we have an opportunity now, in my mind, to where we can conserve it and put a vision in place where the majority of us, including landowners, you know, like what we see, and we can put that through, I say let's go for it.
I got one other thought. I appreciated, I think it was Jackie Vincent Smith. You said that your dad taught you to keep the rights with the land, and the way I'm hearing it, we'll learn more about it, but TDRs adds one more right to your land. Kind of like you have water rights, you have mineral rights. You might be able to get another right that's added to your land that you decided if I'm going to use it or not use it. I mean, keep it with the land or not keep it with the land. It might be something that comes down the pipe that's just one more right that you get to add to your property you don't currently have today, is what we might find out. So just something to, let's stay tuned to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I realize that there's gonna be more opportunities. If the city's intent is to keep it open green space, last night they were willing to pay almost $2 million for a park. I'm willing to, they can start saving their money.
That could be an option as well.
I realize the change is gonna come.
I do too, but I don't want her selling the water. Thanks for listening to us.
I think it's like we said though, we know what we want as a vision, we know what other people want as a vision. There's just certain parts of this that we don't understand. Yeah, I mean, there's bits and pieces that we don't understand that could affect some of us greatly, others it won't affect.
Yeah.
Like the TDR, none of us understand. What does it even stand for? Transfer Developmental Rights. Hey, got it, see? At least I got that far. But that's what I'm saying, is I don't think it's the part that we don't want the city to help and to do those things, but there's just bits and pieces that we don't understand as landowners.
For me, I have looked at scenario 1, 2, and 3. I've looked at leave it alone, and I agree that you need to have a vision of where you need to go. But I look at scenario 1, and I look at the other two, and I think, well, they kind of contradict each other. So if you're gonna say, okay, let's move forward, what are we moving forward with? We haven't quite determined that yet. So do we have 3 scenarios so that down the road, when I say, hey, I don't like this, you say, but it was here on paper. I wish there was a more straightforward, this is what we're after. I understand the city, the river bottoms, I grew up playing where the fairgrounds are. I mean, my sister got her first set of stitches on the mill race. I lived in fear of falling in the mill race. I rode my bike up to my grandma's. My favorite spot is in the river bottoms still, no matter where I've been. I love it there, and I wish it could stay the same forever. It breaks my heart to drive through it now and see some of the changes. So I understand it's going to change. I want it to change responsibly. I understand that. But those 3 scenarios are different enough that it does seem like they overlap and contradict, and I don't know what one you're actually after. To say, hey, wait a second, I have questions about this one. Or I have questions about how this works. I've had developers look at some of those because of what I do for my job, and these don't make sense to me. So how are they making sense to someone who doesn't do this all day, every day? And that's, I guess, where some of my frustration comes from. And it is a frustration for me to think that you could just draw an arbitrary line on a map and cut someone's 401k in half. That's a terrifying thing, because for every one of us, we know that one day you're going to need your savings. You're going to need that. And to know that it could just be cut in half in value, so hopefully that TDR does work. But I'm going to tell you, I spent summers, whether he remembers this or not, I do, was they put ditches along Poplar Lane. Guess what my job was? I got to pick rocks out of the field so that the tractors didn't hit them. Okay, that's
Did you do something bad? Did you do something bad? Because that's what I used to have my kids do when they did something bad.
Well, if you did it, you were bad, you did it during all day. If you were good, you just got it in the morning. I learned to drive on a tractor. I mean, there's something about it that I just absolutely love it. So I get that it needs to be planned, and I hope it's planned responsibly, but there's just a lot of questions still, and that's where I run into my issues with it.
You know where my favorite place is?
Where?
Pioneer Cemetery, looking down at the river bottoms and just finding so much peace and looking at it and watching Fred and Lynn and everybody else down there plowing their ground or cutting their corn or doing all that other stuff. I just love it. And you can see the deer and the pheasants down in there, and And that is part of my life, and I hate to see that go away. Now, I don't own any ground in the river bottoms, but I grew up here, you know, and I rode my bicycles through that river bottom many, many, many times. Drove my cars through there and just looked at it, and there's just a solace peace down in there, and you really don't want to see it change, but it's going to change, and that's where we're going to be. And so, again, here we are trying to make a decision on how we really want to see the vision and what we want to do. And so we're going to try to look at the TDRs, we're going to look at this and that, and try to do the best we can to preserve a beautiful part of our community, but also try to help everybody that does sell or, you know, want to develop or whatever, and make it right. And so, but it's going to be hard. It's not going to be an overnight deal, and I truly am not ready to send this to the city council. Not tonight.
Dave, are you wanting, if a motion was made, to identify the option? Or
Trying to think of the best way to emphasize this. I don't think that's appropriate at all.
to what? To pick an option or no? To not pick an option?
Frankly, the idea in having the document written the way that it is, with different, talk about scenarios, options, is to be clear that with what we know right now, we don't know what's best. We don't know of the options.
Okay.
We don't know what makes the most sense. So with that, no, I don't think we're prepared at all to do that. I think if we knew that, there'd be no need to have more than one in the document, or more than one, to be talking about more than one.
So if we was to recommend and leave all the options still on the table, them could be identified later as we learn more about the TDRs, et cetera.
Yeah.
But really, we're talking about.
And maybe I will comment to this extent, just kind of relative to what I think maybe the next conversation looks like. There's one scenario that potentially would leave the river bottoms completely undeveloped. And for maybe people
We
that.
qualify that, when you say undeveloped by the city, the county, they can do whatever they want,
No.
under the rules of the county,
No,
right?
ideally completely undeveloped. And that would involve all of the development rights from the river bottoms being transferred someplace else. So it's not undeveloped for 10 years or 20, but forever. Getting to that point. There's that scenario, which that scenario might be the ideal if you're the resident in Spanish Fork and you just like riding your bike through it and seeing people farm. That scenario might be the ideal if you're a farmer and you don't want suburban backyards backing onto your farming operation and people, otherwise making your life miserable because there's a neighborhood right next to a field that you're working and that type of a thing. So that might be the starting point to see if we could reach that, level of effectiveness with a TDR program. And I view the other scenarios as maybe compromises from that point. Okay, if for whatever reason that's too much apple to swallow, then what about, maybe just leaving the floodplain part of the river bottoms undeveloped and transferring rights from there? Or, the other things that are kind of talked about, again, from my perspective, as compromises from what I would characterize, based on the input that we've received, as the ideal, which is, hey, river bottom stays the way that it is forever, and the property owners get compensation to the extent that they feel like they've been made whole. Everybody's happy. That would be great. But I think the fact that there are other scenarios that are being talked about acknowledges that we understand that that might not be totally realistic. And we probably need to be ready to talk about some other things. So that's why, from my perspective, the scenarios make sense. And I really appreciate the perspectives that you guys are sharing. And you will not hear me ever say, trust us. I'm not wanting to do that now. But I can say with a lot of confidence that we've spent a lot of time discussing, worrying about, and deliberating, And I think, and you know, again, probably a shortcoming with the process that we've been through. Had you been more included in some of those discussions, I think you'd have a better understanding of where we're coming from and that type of a thing. So I appreciate, I really, really appreciate skepticism. I think that does get us to better products. It makes us produce better work. So you know, those concerns and worries I completely appreciate, and I'm not trying to discount that, but that's how I view the scenarios at least. And that's why during the joint session that we had at different times, there was some probing, you know, of, hey, what scenario does everybody think? And every time I just cringed, you know, I just felt like, man, how could we possibly, you know, think about that before we have more information?
Yeah. So a motion to recommend this to Vision could certainly and include all three options. At least it gives us something we don't have today. And to Commissioners Mendenhall, I liked your comment about another community next door, the River Bottoms, that was probably done just piecemeal and happens the way it happens. That's what I really am afraid of, not having that happen to our River Bottoms, to where you just come in and do chunks and all of a sudden you end up with, you get this, to me, encompasses the whole thing. You've got three options. They can be decided later. The TDRs could be decided later, but at least we've got this bigger vision that we've started to roadmap the River Bottoms.
My thoughts are that, on what you said, Brad, if it were to be developed in chunks, that's gonna take a lot of time. And even if it were, I don't have an issue with driving through Benjamin or driving through Lake Shore and feeling like I'm still in the country. If that's what were to happen in the River Bottoms, I don't necessarily think that I would have an issue with that. In our joint meeting, Dave, and you probably won't like this, but I expressed my opinion that the way I would like to see it, and this is just me, it's my opinion, everybody else has their opinion and can say what they want, but for me, my choices are you either leave it in the county and let it get developed over how many years it'll take in 5-acre lots, you know, with septic tanks and wells and whatever else, and it'll look like Benjamin or Lake Shore, and I don't have an issue with that. Or you do option 3, which is you try and conserve as much of it as possible. So I would struggle or not feel comfortable with putting forth a plan that still has option 1 or option 2 that you could see homes being developed in the River Bottoms. I'm not comfortable with that. And so for me, I don't know what it would take, how much time it would take for us to see if option 3 is even feasible with TDRs, if we need to wait for that, or if we say, okay, we still need to leave the other 2 on the table because option 3 might not be feasible. But for me, if option 3 is not feasible, then I'm not in favor of option 1 or option 2. So that's where I stand.
It's good feedback, for sure.
Yeah. Commissioner Mitchell, do you want to chime in?
No, I've talked to, since we had that joint meeting, I've talked to several developers just in other meetings where we're talking about other projects, about what their opinion of the TDRs is, and everyone I talked to is a very valuable tool to them. They like that, having that option. It gives them a paper lot, basically, on another development they're doing somewhere else in the receiving area. Mm-hmm. So I think there's, I was wondering what the market reception, these people are being. It seems like there's a need for it or a desire for it. But I do agree with Kevin. We need to know what that is going to be. I don't know though, by us recommending the vision plan going forward, if we're necessarily eliminating. If our goal is to limit what the council wants to do, it's up to them. We're just recommending forward this. The vision for the River Bottoms. And as Dave has explained, it's the option 3, I think, is the goal. but it may not be attainable depending on what the tools we have to use to get there. So I guess I don't know where my comfort level is right now until I know what the value of that TDR is, or whatever tool there is. I'd like to keep the river bottoms the way they are right now. But at the same time, I recognize the rights of everybody that has land there. Unless we can satisfy that, it's hard to recommend something to move forward that might change that or limit them in any way.
Okay. Well, I think everybody's had a chance to speak their mind. I'd entertain a motion either way. Or some kind of a motion.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah. Please.
I don't think there is any need at all for anybody at this point in time to feel like adopting this document is divisive in any way, really. I mean, just from what I've heard tonight, what I heard before, and there's some things a little bit differently tonight than I've heard before. I really think that we do collectively share the same goal in mind. And from everybody, I've heard that. How we get there, we have to figure that out. And the adoption of this document, I don't think is the critical issue. So I'd hate to see us feel like, the direction that we go right now with this issue, a motion or that type of thing, that it creates any kind of division, or maybe detracts from moving forward with a sense of unified purpose as we try to make a TDR program work, try to make that optimal option work. So
again, Dave, when did they say they'd have these TDRs to us?
The idea of having a concept in mind and some kind of gauge as to how realistic that concept is. We have a mid-year training with the city council this year. That's really the first complete weekend in February. So the goal is to have something before then that we could run by you guys and spend some time talking to them about. So that's kind of the time frame that we would want to work with. And that's not to answer every question, to cross every T and dot every I, but to have had enough meetings with these folks and enough meetings with people in the development community that would be buying those paper lots to see, if realistically there's a way to make that.
I'd like to really see that option to us so we can look at it. These people can see that type of an option too, then we can look at it and talk about it, and we're not ready for that yet. So I would make a motion to table this right now until those issues are here, so we can have it explained to us, and explained to you guys, so them options are on the table. Other than that, I'm sort of with Kevin here. I just soon have it left and let the county deal with it the way that they're doing. And if developers want to come in and buy 5-acre lots and develop it that way, then that's open space, and that's going to keep it that way. And in another sense, like I said, if it takes a couple of months before these reports come in, then I think that's the way we should do it. These guys are still going to farm. There's not going to be any developers coming in to talk to them for a little while anyway. There's been some developers talking, but they're holding back just like we are, and nothing's going to happen till this spring anyway for anything else. So I think it gives us an opportunity to get some reports back into us, get us more educated in some other things, and then let's sit down and make it.
Dave, does having the vision plan in place prior to the meeting with developers and the consulting company doing TDRs, does that affect or change that meeting in any way?
No, I don't think it needs to. I don't think it needs to.
So you don't feel there's any urgency as far as putting this plan in, and amending the general plan for this?
Between now and
Between now and, yeah, end of February.
Let's say February. Let's say February.
I'm not trying to flip the table at all, but really, I think it matters if it matters to you guys and if it matters to the city council. We as staff, you know, I haven't heard anybody say, let's not try to, you know, put the things that the document prescribes into play. So that's our marching orders, whether formally, you know, it gets a stamp as, you know, part of an ordinance or something like that. That's for you and the city council to decide. And if at some point in time somebody just says, put this in the shredder, you know, whether it's been adopted or not.
Well, like Seth said,
We
we
could
don't
do
want to
that.
punt. Like, we don't want to punt.
I'm not necessarily hearing that from you, right?
We're not going to punt this. We're going to make this work. But again, we need to get the right tools in place. We're getting told that maybe by February we're going to have that. So I'm going to make a motion that we table this till February, and we get all the tools here, so these folks don't have to keep coming every month on the month and wondering what's going to happen.
What else have you got to do?
And if we do have them come, put them on the first of the agenda.
Unless if your road's still closed, then you can come back.
Anyway, that's my motion, that we table it till
Got
February.
a motion,
All right, I'll second that motion.
got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
That's a punt right down to the 1 yard line, isn't it, Dave? Utah punter couldn't do any better.
62-yarder, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I do have to say, thank you for listening to us.
Absolutely.
Before we didn't feel like we was getting listened to. Thank you, Dave, wherever he's running off to. But we feel like we're getting listened to at this, I do. I'm gonna speak for myself. The last couple of meetings. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And by the way, you
A
guys,
whole lot better with what's happening.
by the way, it was mentioned that there's been developers contacted. I've talked to 2 different ones since our last meeting, and they're very interested in TDRs. They're buying options.
Yeah.
They see it. They see
Chris,
it
you can
as.
ask Dave. He has information on him.
Yeah,
Just
and
ask him
so
to email you.
as you talk to people, you guys know who these people are. You know, we all know some of them. So, you know, hey, talk to them. Talk to people who have had experiences with either TDRs or with development. See how they feel about this stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did we find a pheasant in the weeds?
That's a good analogy.
So, yeah, right.
Dave just mentioned to me that the pizza is on its way. I can take as long as I need to.
Does that mean I can
That's not
stand up and
true,
move
is it?
around?
He's not even listening.
Let's hold for just a minute. We're either gonna take a break. Oh, or
I
we're
was
gonna
hoping to
table,
take less
or
than
we're gonna
5
table
minutes,
this
so-
discussion.
Did it take less than 5 minutes?
Hold on. If we can hold him to that, let's hold him accountable. 5 minutes.
If you can do this in 5 minutes, you got it. But 6 minutes could be messy.
Yes, this is the last item.
Okay.
It's an important one, and I hope everything I say, I'm just preaching to the choir. So what we are tasked with each year is to do an annual review of our housing plan, specifically moderate income housing, and with that, look at the strategies that we are implementing and see if we're having a positive or a negative result. You know, hopefully we're making progress in providing and looking at the needs of all the citizens of the community. So the state, as you're aware, is growing rapidly. With that growth, we need to make sure that we're keeping ahead of affordable housing units and keeping ahead of available housing units. The state has provided us data to assist us in doing that analysis, and no surprise, we're showing that there's a need for both. So what we've done to be proactive is we've looked at a number of the strategies that we can select. I'll just go over 3 tonight and just kind of give you an update as to how we're doing. First one is the ADUs. As you're aware, we loosened the regulations, we removed some of the barriers completely, and then we expanded where they could be within the city limits. So far, we've seen a number of applications come in for new ADUs. Surprisingly, a lot of them have been in new homes. So maybe we need to do some more outreach to get some of the older parts of town either utilizing them or making them legal. Second one is zoning for higher densities. So the last few years, we've done the R4 zone and the R5 zone. The R5 zone, the only project that we've utilized that zoning designation for is the old Reese Elementary School site. If you haven't been by there recently, definitely recommend it. Great looking project. And the other zone, the R4, we did have the Ridgeline Parkway community come in, the applicants come in and talk about the progress that they're making as far as coming forward with the 300 plus apartments there off of Spanish.
Up there just east of the new Lowe's, right?
Yes.
Spanish Parkway, but up there on.
And then the third strategy that we're implementing is encouraging higher density near major transit corridors. And so if you look at the general plan, the land use element, the map that we've discussed earlier tonight, Center Street, I-15, that's our future UTA, multimodal transportation location. It's going to have the Frontrunner, it's going to have UDOT's interchange. We have our highest densities planned for that area. And so what we've provided to you tonight, and it's also available online, and I'll email the link to you, is the information that we're going to submit to the state showing that yes, we're taking housing seriously in Spanish Fork. We are growing, but with that growth, we're providing options. And we're trying to stay ahead of the curve as far as making sure we've got affordable units as well as available units. That's it, unless you've got any questions.
So Brandon, do they have a plan with the state to give money to the people building these higher density homes to help them get into them?
That's one option that they're talking about. I anticipate with the legislative session this year, housing will continue to be discussed. Currently, there's some options that cities can choose from, but I know the state does have, like the Olene Walker Fund is set up specifically to what you're referring to.
Because of the price of land, the price of materials, the price of everything, doesn't matter how high density it is, people still can't afford to get in them.
And I was actually reading an article about that happening in California, where no matter how high they go with the density, they're not solving their housing crisis.
But if there's money involved or something like that where people can go and get that, if there's that type of an issue, then I think that would help quite a bit.
Yeah.
And a question I have related to that is that the only development that I know of that is in that kind of a vein is the Diamond Fork Apartments there. And to tell you the truth, I don't know if there's issues that I don't know about as far as problems there, but you know, they're pretty attractive, and I don't see a lot of issues from the road. But since then, I don't know that we have another development like that in Spanish Fork, and I don't know if there's one proposed.
Currently not.
Brandon, are cities being required to submit this to the state?
Yes.
What happens if the state decides that what the city's doing isn't enough? What's the purpose behind this?
The carrot that they're utilizing, dangling in front of the cities, is if you fall out of compliance, then it may restrict you from gaining funding. What's the word I'm looking for?
Transportation.
Transportation-related funding.
Is compliance clearly defined?
Say that again?
Is compliance clearly defined? Do cities
Yes. So the
understand
state
and know
code,
what compliance is?
clearly defines what needs to be done, what steps need to be taken. And so this is one of those steps. We're doing our annual review, and then we're going to ship these findings off to the state. What they've done in the past years, if they feel somebody hasn't submitted enough information, they'll make them aware of that. As you probably recall, we looked at this last year, so it used to be a biennial requirement. Now that's been changed to an annual requirement. And so the hope is if cities do enough to be proactive, then the legislative sessions won't result in more state mandates as far as, or state oversight as far as what happens where in communities. And so,
So Brandon, what guarantee do we have that the state's gonna go and try to get commuter rail into the cities and stuff like that, so it helps us develop this, help this higher density type of stuff? What guarantee do we have from them guys?
so we don't have a guarantee other than it's adopted in their master transportation plans showing in X amount of years, we're gonna have stations here, here, and here. We're gonna have interchanges here, here, and here. But you're right, it's all contingent upon
I've seen that plan
funding
10
and-
years ago, you know, and I haven't seen anything develop from it yet, but, you know, here we are, we're trying to guarantee this type of high density around these areas, but yet I'm not seeing anything from the state coming back to help us with that.
And it appears that if that happens, and we're looking at West Center Street, it's going to have to be on the west side of the freeway, and so that's going to be a considerable cost to the city to get services on the west side, right?
Considerable cost to develop.
The development, right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
It is currently slated to be on the west side of I-15.
Well, it's the only place you can go,
It will be.
there's not enough room this side, is there?
Well,
And the rail
They
lines.
talked on the Center
Stop will
Street,
be on the other
Center
side,
Street
yeah.
area.
The rail lines are already in place.
Well, that's.
Sorry, I went over,
Is there any action, or is this just informative?
mainly
Line with
to
the
provide you with what we feel is progress being made and then seek any input that you have. And we'll have this same conversation with the city council before we submit our submittal to the state.
So what would be nice is just one thing is report with numbers, like how many permits you actually report.
It's in here. I didn't want to go through those to try and save your
That's
time.
right, you did good. You did 3 minutes, we've got
got a-
Q&A for more, so.
As long as you want with the Q&A, right?
Yes,
So it's in the report, how many ADUs have been,
Yes.
permits have been reported?
13 since
Incidentally, it's 13. It hasn't been we haven't been flooded.
Haven't been flooded yet.
Yeah.
But
We got
compared
them worked
to how historic numbers, 13 is a great,
Sent out
great progress.
Yeah.
232 letters, approximately,
The people that have existing.
or potential existing ones.
I know.
Just trying to
Was
get
some of
them to
those from
comply,
complaints?
right? You're trying to get them to comply.
To make them recognized as 100% legal.
Yeah, but are we marketing to everyone that has a basement or could potentially have an ADU?
That's the 232.
We got a lot more houses.
I wouldn't
now
say
that
that
are in the-
potentially could. That's the people that we think.
Are currently.
Based off of
Yeah, and I'm
utility
saying I wanna
records,
get
They have a lot of cars on
you.
addresses.
I would
They have
say
like cars in
yes,
front of
we
their house.
are, but basically it's broadcasting to
Based on
everybody,
GPS.
Driving
GPS.
around the zoning, we approved, right?
which is
Yes.
basically
The whole town, all
everybody. Yeah.
So are we getting the word out to the entire city that this is now the system, this is now legal, this has now been changed? I just don't know how we're marketing it.
I think we've done a pretty good job as
I'm
far
not sure
as
what
the
more we could do.
website, Facebook, the newsletter.
It's on Facebook, it's in the newsletter, it's in the utility bills, it's,
On
Do a
TV.
door-to-door
We've
campaign.
done Facebook Lives.
man, that's crazy. I thought we'd have a bigger run
We've
on the bank.
increased our building permits with basement remodels, and that's where you're gonna start to see some of the influx,
Okay,
is
good.
once people are doing their building permits. So we've been working with the building department so that anytime a basement remodel permit is issued, regardless of whether they're adding a kitchen, they're just finishing 2 bedrooms, I'm notified of that permit so that I can then send that person a letter, just letting them know this is a program that is available. If you're finishing the basement, you'll need to do that. Then, when they issue a final inspection on the building department, I'm copied on that inspection sheet
Okay.
so that I know that they've received a final, so that I can work on following up to make sure if they qualify to get registered. But so, it's going, it's not, you're not gonna start seeing full effects, it's gonna take some time. because of that construction period, is my guess. As far as trying to capture those that are existing, I've worked with the utility office closely. I've gotten a list of all of the potential units that have double meters. I've tried to roll out duplexes. I've sat down with the GIS department and went through the properties that way too. So we've been trying to be as extensive as we can.
Good, thank you. That's good.
Yeah, good work, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So be it.
I'll second that, hurry.
Amen. Hey, it's before
I'm
10
gonna ask
o'clock.
Dave if he's got something else.
Yeah.
The meeting's over, but it's not too late to thank Clint.
Oh.
And I'm embarrassed that we didn't lead tonight with this, but this is his last meeting.
This is it?
So
You got one more month.
I thought you weren't going through.